Jake the dog is dying in space and he knows it. Not right now, but soon. He saw it in a dream, the kind of dream that feels more real than breakfast, more certain than gravity. In the dream, a cosmic owl with eyes like black holes told him his fate. Jake would die in space, saving his friend, becoming a brick, floating forever in the nothing between stars. And here's the thing about prophetic dreams in the land of Ooh. They don't lie. They wait. So Jake does what Jake does best. He panics, spirals, tries to control the uncontrollable. He stretches himself into a rocket ship because maybe if he becomes the spaceship, he can't die in space. That's Jake logic. Bend reality before reality bends you. His heart races as he launches himself toward the cosmos, Finn strapped to his back. Both of them hurtling toward a banana space station because apparently that's what passes for infrastructure after the apocalypse. The stars stretch past them like pulled taffy. Jake's body becomes metal and fire and thrust. But inside, he's still just a 28-year-old magic dog who thought he'd have more time. Don't we all? But this moment, Jake transforming himself into a vehicle to outrun death itself, this is everything you need to know about him. He's terrified. He's hilarious. He's doing it anyway. And he's so much more than Finn's goofy older brother. See, for 10 seasons and 283 episodes, Jake has been there, stretching across impossible distances, bending into furniture when the situation calls for it, turning himself into a shield when Finn needs protecting. He plays viola, makes terrible bacon pancakes, gives advice that sounds stupid until you realise it's profound, and somehow manages to be the most emotionally intelligent character in a show full of candy princesses and vampire queens. While Finn grows up on screen, Jake was already grown, already broken and rebuilt, carrying wisdom earned through pain we'll only discover later. But who is Jake, really? Strip away the magic, the stretching, the fact that he can become literally anything. What's left? That's the question this story answers, and the answer is more complicated, darker, and more beautiful than you might expect from a dog who spends half his time napping, and the other half making sandwich-based puns. Jake isn't just Finn's brother, though that bond defines both of them. He's Lady Rainicorn's partner, father to 5 rapidly aging hybrid pups who inherited his powers and his problems. He's a former criminal, a reformed thief who used to run with bad crowds before he found something worth staying good for. He's a philosopher wrapped in yellow fur, dropping existential truth bombs between fart jokes. He's afraid of everything: death, ghosts, losing the people he loves, becoming irrelevant, running out of time, and he chooses courage anyway. The magic dog with infinite shapes spent his entire life figuring out which shape was truly him. Here's what they don't tell you in the early episodes, what takes seasons to reveal. Jake's powers didn't come from nowhere. He wasn't born a magic dog. He was bitten, infected, changed. An alien creature called Warren Ampersand, a shape-shifting parasite from the crystal dimension, bit him when he was a puppy. The alien's essence merged with his DNA, rewrote his biology, gave him abilities that shouldn't exist. His adoptive parents, Joshua and Margaret, never told him. They let him believe he was naturally magical, that his powers were a gift instead of an accident. And this changed everything. Because Jake's entire identity was built on a lie he didn't know he was living. Every moment of stretching, every transformation, every time he casually bent physics because that's just what Jake does, all of it traces back to a bite, a secret, a truth his parents took to their graves. When Jake finally learns the truth, much later, it recontextualizes his whole existence. Was anything about him ever really his? Or was he always just the aftermath of an alien's hunger? But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, you need to understand what makes Jake so essential to Adventure Time's entire emotional architecture. In a show about growing up after the world ended, Jake represents something specific. He's the adult who admits he doesn't have it figured out. While Princess Bubblegum plays God with her candy citizens and Marceline carries 1,000 years of trauma, Jake just exists. Imperfectly, beautifully, without pretending he's more than what he is. He makes mistakes constantly. He lies to Finn about important things. He ditches his brother for his girlfriend. He gives advice that's sometimes genuinely terrible. He once became a god to tiny people, and immediately started abusing his power for entertainment. Jake is flawed in ways that matter, and he doesn't apologize for being human. Or dog? Or whatever he technically is once you factor in the alien DNA. That honesty makes him revolutionary. In a landscape of animation where mentors are either perfect wise sages or completely dysfunctional disasters, Jake splits the difference. He's Uncle Iroh's patience without his detachment, Bender's chaos without his nihilism. He's specifically, uniquely Jake, deeply loving and occasionally selfish, profound and immature, brave and terrified, all at once, all the time. His relationship with Finn anchors everything. Two adopted brothers raising each other in a treehouse, making up the rules as they go, saving kingdoms between breakfast and lunch. Finn is 12 when the show starts. Jake is 28. That age gap matters. Jake remembers a world before Finn, had a whole life of crime and consequence before he decided to be good. He's not teaching Finn how to be a hero from some abstract moral high ground. He's teaching him from the trenches of his own failures. When Finn faces the Lich, Jake holds his hand. When Finn gets his heart broken, Jake makes him bacon pancakes and lets him cry. When Finn questions everything about his purpose and destiny, Jake tells him, "Dude, sucking at something is the first step to being sort of good at something." It sounds like a throwaway line. It's actually the show's thesis. Jake taught a generation that growth is messy, that you don't have to be perfect to be good, that the secret to life isn't having all the answers, it's being willing to stretch yourself into new shapes until you find one that fits. But there's darkness underneath all that chill. Jake's laid-back philosophy masks deep fear. He's terrified of dying, of losing Finn, of failing his kids, of that cosmic owl's prophecy coming true. The New Frontier episode isn't just Jake being paranoid. It's Jake confronting the central horror of existence. You can be magic, you can bend reality, you can stretch across entire kingdoms, and you'll still die. Death doesn't care about your powers, it waits. So Jake tries to cheat it. He becomes a spaceship, thinking maybe he can outrun fate. Spoiler, he can't. None of us can. But the trying matters. The choosing to act despite terror, that's where heroism lives. And Jake is a hero, even though he'd probably cringe at the word. He fights monsters and saves people and goes on adventures, sure, but his real heroism is smaller, harder. It's apologizing when he's wrong. It's showing up for Finn even when he's tired. It's trying to be a good father despite having no idea what that means. It's stretching himself thin, literally, emotionally, because people need him, and Jake decided a long time ago that being needed is worth the cost. Why does Jake's stretching power work differently than any other magic in OO? Why can he become anything? A key, a boat, a meatloaf, a perfect replica of himself, infinity itself, while other magical beings have limits? The answer connects to his origin, to Warren Ampersand's shape-shifting biology, to the way alien DNA rewrote the rules of what's possible. Jake's power isn't just magic, it's biology, physics, and imagination colliding in his bloodstream. But here's what's strange. Jake's stretching isn't just physical, it's metaphorical. He stretches himself emotionally, bending to fit whatever shape his loved ones need. He's a father to his pups, a brother to Finn, a partner to Lady, a friend to everyone from BMO to Marceline. He adapts, flexes, reforms. Sometimes he stretches too far. The Limit episode shows him breaking down when he reaches his maximum capacity, his body and mind failing simultaneously. There are edges even to infinite flexibility. What made a lazy, saxophone-playing dog become a hero anyway? The answer is Finn. Before Finn, Jake was a criminal running with a gang, stealing and causing chaos with his friend Tiffany. Then Joshua and Margaret brought home a baby human found in the wreckage of the apocalypse, and Jake became a brother. He chose to change. He chose to be better. Not because some destiny demanded it. Not because he was inherently good, but because he loved this weird little human baby and wanted to be someone that baby could look up to. That choice echoes through everything. Jake's entire arc is about deciding who you are despite where you came from. How did someone so afraid of commitment end up with 5 kids? That's Lady Rainicorn, the magical half-rainbow, half-unicorn who speaks only Korean, who sees in infrared, who fell for a magic dog despite every reason not to. Their relationship is Adventure Time's most stable romance, which makes it quietly radical. No drama, no betrayal, just two weird beings loving each other across language barriers and species differences. Jake learned Korean for her. That's the kind of stretching that matters most, bending yourself to meet someone else without losing your shape. Then came the pups. Charlie, TV, Viola, Kim Kil-wan, Jake Jr. 5 rapidly aging hybrid children who inherited their parents' powers and problems. Jake panicked at first. Classic Jake. Terrified of responsibility he can't escape. Then he leaned in, became present, threw himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he brings to everything else. Not perfectly, though. Never perfectly. Kim Kil-wan resents him for being too relaxed, too irresponsible. Jake Jr. inherits his criminal tendencies. TV leaves to become an actor. The pups grow up fast, Rainicorn biology, and Jake has to learn that being a father means letting go. Still, he tries. That's what matters. Jake the dog, who was adopted by heroes, who carries an alien's DNA, who died in a dream, keeps trying to be good enough for the people who love him. But here's the secret Jake carries, the weight under all that lightness. He knows he won't live as long as Finn. Dog years, even magical ones, run faster. The show hints at it constantly. Jake getting grey fur, slowing down, his joints aching. While Finn is still growing, Jake is already aging. The Cosmic Owl's prophecy isn't just about dying in space, it's about dying at all. Jake will leave first, and Finn will have to keep adventuring without him. That knowledge colours everything. Why Jake teaches Finn so much. Why he's desperate to make every moment count. Why he naps hard, loves hard, plays hard. Because time is short, even when you can stretch yourself across mountains. This is the story of a magic dog who learned that the scariest shape you can stretch into is the shape of yourself. The real you, without the powers, without the jokes, without the ability to bend reality. Just Jake. Flawed, afraid, loving, trying. And somehow, that's the most heroic shape of all. Jake the dog isn't supposed to exist. Not like this, anyway. Not with the ability to stretch his body across entire kingdoms. Not with the power to become literally anything his imagination can picture. Not with alien DNA coursing through what should have been ordinary dog biology. But here's the thing about Adventure Time. Nothing in you happens by accident. Every power has an origin. Every gift has a cost. And Jake's magic, it came from a bite, one moment, one alien. The truth stays buried for years. Decades, really, if you count the years before the show even starts. Jake grows up thinking he's naturally magical, that his stretching powers are just part of who he is, like having fur or loving bacon pancakes. His parents, Joshua and Margaret, 2 former adventurers turned investigators of the weird and dangerous, never tell him otherwise. They raise him alongside his brother Jermaine in their old house, teaching both boys about courage and fighting and doing the right thing when no one's watching. Jake learns to stretch. He learns to fight. He learns to be a hero, or at least hero-adjacent. But nobody tells him about Warren Ampersand. The revelation comes in Joshua and Margaret Investigations, an episode that recontextualizes Jake's entire existence in about 11 minutes. We see Joshua and Margaret in their prime, tracking down a shape-shifting monster that's been causing problems in the crystal dimension. The monster is Warren Ampersand, an alien entity that looks like someone crossed a snake with a nightmare and gave it the ability to wear reality like a cheap costume. Warren can change shape, absorb matter, and apparently reproduce through infection. Parasitic shape-shifting. That's the technical term for what he does. Joshua fights him. Margaret helps. They think they've won when they seal Warren in a crystal prison. Mission accomplished, right? Go home, have some celebratory tea, maybe pet the dogs. Except Warren already bit one of the dogs. Young Jake, still a puppy, innocent and normal and decidedly not magical yet. The bite transfers Warren's essence into Jake's body. The alien DNA doesn't just infect him, it merges with him, becomes him, rewrites his genetic code from the inside out. Jake starts glowing. His body changes. Suddenly this regular dog puppy can stretch and bend and reshape himself, and Joshua and Margaret make a choice that defines everything. They don't tell him. They watch their adopted puppy transform into something impossible, something that shouldn't exist according to any natural law in Ooh, and they decide the kindest thing to do is let him believe it's normal. Let him think he's just a magic dog. Don't burden him with the knowledge that his powers come from a parasitic alien bite, that his entire biology is the result of an infection, that technically he shares DNA with a monster that wanted to destroy them. So Jake grows up thinking he's naturally magical. He stretches and plays and develops his powers without the weight of their true origin. He becomes a hero, or at least the kind of person who helps his brother save candy people from zombies, without knowing that his heroism is built on his parents' lie. Is that kindness, or is it control? The philosophical weight here is crushing once you really sit with it. Jake's entire sense of self, his confidence, his understanding of his place in the world, all of it rests on a foundation of parental deception. They meant well, probably. Joshua and Margaret were good parents, as far as post-apocalyptic monster-hunting adventurers go. They loved Jake and Jermaine fiercely. They taught them skills, gave them purpose, died protecting the world from evil forces. But they also looked at their son and decided he couldn't handle his own truth. Think about what that means for Jake. Every time he stretched, he thought it was natural. Every time someone asked about his powers, he shrugged them off as just something magic dogs do. He never questioned it, because why would he? Your parents don't usually lie about where you came from, except in Jake's case, they absolutely did. And that lie lasted his entire childhood, his teenage years, his young adult criminal phase, his reformation into a hero, his partnership with Lady Rainicorn, the birth of his children. Decades of living as someone without knowing the full truth of what made you possible. When Jake finally learns about Warren Ampersand, and it happens much later, after Joshua and Margaret have died, after Jake has already become the person he is, his reaction is surprisingly measured. He's shocked, sure, upset, definitely. But Jake doesn't break. He doesn't spiral into an identity crisis about being part alien. He processes it, sits with it, and ultimately decides it doesn't change who he chose to become. That's growth. That's emotional maturity. That's Jake understanding something profound. Origin doesn't determine destination. But let's talk about Warren Ampersand himself, because he's more than just Jake's biological father. He's a dark mirror, a shadow self, a vision of what Jake's powers could become if used selfishly. Warren can shapeshift just like Jake. He can absorb things into his body, change his mass, become anything. Same abilities, almost identical power set. But Warren uses his powers parasitically. He takes, consumes, infects. He spreads himself through others not out of love but out of hunger. Jake does the opposite. He stretches himself for others, bends to help, reshapes his body to protect people he loves. Same power, opposite purpose. It's like they both inherited the same tool but chose completely different ways to use it. Warren chooses consumption. Jake chooses connection. And that difference matters more than the DNA they share. There's something deeply unsettling about Warren as a villain. He's not trying to destroy the world or collect magic artifacts or rule over Ooh. His motivation is more primal, more biological. He reproduces through infection, spreads his essence through bites, creates offspring by turning other creatures into versions of himself. He's a parent through parasitism. When you think about it that way, Jake's existence is an act of violent reproduction. Warren forcing his genetics into an unwilling host. Except Jake wasn't just a host. He was a person, a puppy who grew up to be a dog who became a hero. Warren's DNA gave him powers, but Joshua and Margaret's love gave him purpose. Warren provided the ability to stretch. Joshua and Margaret taught him what to stretch for. So who's Jake's real father? The alien who bit him and gave him powers, or the human adventurer who raised him and taught him about courage? The show never really answers this, and that's intentional. Jake has 3 parents, technically: Joshua, Margaret, and Warren Ampersand. Biology, adoption, and infection, all mixed together in a way that defies simple categorization. But if you ask Jake, the answer is clear. Joshua is his dad. Full stop. The bite gave him powers, sure, but Joshua gave him everything that actually matters. How to be brave when you're scared. How to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. How to apologize when you're wrong. How to make the people you love feel safe. Warren gave him the ability to become anything. Joshua taught him what to become. This connects to Adventure Time's broader theme of found family and chosen identity. The show is obsessed with this question. Does where you come from determine who you are? Finn is a human raised by dogs in a post-apocalyptic candy kingdom. Marceline is a half-demon who chose to be more than her demon father's daughter. Princess Bubblegum is a sentient piece of candy who became a scientific genius and quasi-dictator. Ice King is a human archaeologist transformed into a wizard by a cursed crown. Nobody in Ooh is just one thing. Everyone's identity is layered, complicated, built from multiple conflicting origins, and Jake fits perfectly into this pattern. He's a dog, an alien hybrid, an adopted son, a criminal reformed, a hero by choice. All of these identities exist simultaneously. None of them cancel the others out. The revelation about Warren Ampersand doesn't erase Jake's heroism or invalidate his growth. It contextualizes it. It shows that Jake chose goodness despite having the DNA of a parasitic monster. He inherited power from an alien who used shapeshifting to harm, and Jake decided to use that same power to help. That's not predetermined, that's choice. And choice is what makes Jake remarkable. Think about the implications of his powers now, knowing where they come from. When Jake stretches himself into a house to shelter Finn from rain, he's using Warren's parasitic abilities to protect instead of consume. When he becomes a key to unlock a door for BMO, he's adapting his shapeshifting for kindness. When he splits himself into 5 copies so his pups each get individual attention, he's using his alien biology to love harder. Every time Jake stretches, he's taking Warren Ampersand's predatory power and transforming it into something generous. That's alchemy. That's redemption. Not of Warren. Warren is still a parasitic nightmare creature, but of the power itself. Jake redeemed his own abilities by choosing what to do with them. There's also something tragic about Jake never knowing the truth for so long. All those years of stretching, never understanding the cost, because there is a cost. The Limit episode proves it. Jake can push his powers too far, reach his maximum capacity, and break down physically and mentally. His body isn't meant to stretch infinitely, even though it often seems like it can. The alien DNA gave him powers, but it also gave him limits, vulnerabilities, weaknesses. Did Warren have those same limits? Or did Jake inherit something incomplete, a partial version of Warren's abilities filtered through dog biology? We never really find out. Warren appears rarely in the show, more as a haunting presence than an active threat. He's out there somewhere in the multiverse, still shapeshifting, still infecting, still being a parasitic nightmare, but he's not part of Jake's daily life. He's just the origin story Jake didn't know he had. And when Jake does learn about Warren, something interesting happens. He doesn't seek him out. He doesn't need closure from his biological father. He doesn't want a relationship with the alien who gave him powers. Jake has already decided who his family is. Finn, Lady Rainicorn, his pups, the friends he's made through a lifetime of adventures. Warren is biologically connected to him, sure, but biology isn't family. Choice is family. That's the real lesson here. Jake's power came from Warren Ampersand's bite, but Jake's character came from his own choices. He chose to help Finn. He chose to learn Korean for Lady. He chose to be present for his kids even when he was scared. He chose to use his stretching abilities to build instead of destroy, to connect instead of consume. Warren gave him the tools. Jake decided what to build with them. Maybe the realest thing about Jake is that nothing about him was predetermined. Not his powers, not his heroism, not even his species anymore once you factor in the alien DNA. He became Jake the dog through choice, not birth. He looked at the abilities he had, abilities that came from a parasitic alien bite, and decided to be kind anyway. To be generous. To be the kind of person who stretches himself thin so others can have what they need. In a world where destiny and prophecy constantly threaten to override free will, Jake stands as proof that you can be more than your origin story. You can be infected by a monster and choose not to become monstrous. You can carry alien DNA and still be beautifully, stubbornly, wonderfully yourself. Warren Ampersand bit a puppy and created something he never intended. A hero who would use parasitic powers for love, who would take the ability to consume and transform it into the capacity to care. That's not infection. That's transformation. And Jake the dog transformed himself into someone worth being, regardless of where his powers came from or what they were meant for. The bite made him magical. But Jake made himself matter. There's a moment in The Visitor where Finn disappears, and Jake starts glitching out of reality. Not metaphorically, literally. His body fragments, pixels scattering across the screen like a corrupted video file trying to hold itself together. He can't exist in a world without Finn. The universe itself won't let him. Jake's entire molecular structure depends on his brother being there, being real, being present. When Finn vanishes into a different dimension, Jake begins to unravel at the fundamental level of existence. That's not codependency. That's love so complete it rewrites physics. But let's back up. Let's start at the beginning, back when Finn was just a baby human found in the wreckage of the Mushroom War, crying in the ruins of civilization. Joshua and Margaret brought him home, this tiny human in a world with almost no humans left, and Jake, already a kid himself, already dealing with his own alien-powered weirdness, became a brother. Not by blood. Not by species. By choice. Two adopted boys raising each other in a post-apocalyptic candy kingdom. One human, one magic dog. Both orphaned by a world that ended before either of them could understand what they lost. They made a family out of that shared confusion, built a life in a treehouse, and decided that saving princesses from Ice Kings was a reasonable career path. The show starts with them already bonded, already inseparable, already communicating in that weird telepathic shorthand that comes from years of shared experience. Finn is 12 years old, wearing a bear hat that covers his entire head because he's self-conscious about his humanity. Jake is 28, already fully grown, already past his wild youth and criminal phase, already the person he decided to become. The age gap matters more than the show initially lets on. Jake isn't growing up alongside Finn. He's guiding him through it, having already walked that path himself. He remembers being 12, remembers the confusion and intensity and desperate need to matter. He also remembers being 15, 18, 22, making mistakes that hurt people, running with Tiffany's gang, stealing and causing chaos because he hadn't yet found something worth being good for. Jake has lived a full life before the show even starts, and all that accumulated experience becomes the foundation of how he teaches Finn. Except teaching implies a formal structure, and nothing about Finn and Jake's relationship is formal. They're brothers, best friends, roommates, adventuring partners, and occasionally each other's conscience. They share a psychic bond that lets them communicate without words, though they still use words constantly because silence would be boring. They've been inside each other's bodies multiple times through various magical mishaps. They've shared dreams, fears, sandwiches, and approximately 10,000 hours of video games. When Finn needs to learn something, Jake doesn't sit him down for lessons. He just lives out loud and lets Finn watch. The first episode sets the template. Zombie apocalypse in the Candy Kingdom. Finn wants to fight. Jake wants to party with Princess Bubblegum. Finn is all intensity and heroic desperation. Jake is all chill and tactical laziness. They balance each other. Finn's drive pushes Jake to actually do things. Jake's calm keeps Finn from burning out before he's 14. Together they save the candy people, defeat the zombies, and establish the dynamic that carries the entire series. Finn wants to be a hero. Jake teaches him that heroism is mostly showing up and trying not to die. But Jake also teaches him the complicated stuff, the lessons you can't get from sword fighting and dungeon crawling. He teaches Finn about girls, though Jake's advice is consistently terrible, and based on outdated ideas about romance that even Jake knows are nonsense. He teaches Finn about heartbreak by being present when Princess Bubblegum rejects him, when Flame Princess breaks up with him, when every crush crashes into reality's sharp edges. Jake doesn't fix it. He just makes bacon pancakes and reminds Finn that pain is temporary but breakfast is forever. He teaches Finn about growing up by admitting he's still figuring it out himself. Jake doesn't pretend to have all the answers. He offers what he's learned. Be yourself, suck at things until you're better, apologize when you hurt people, stretch when you need to reach someone. Simple wisdom that sounds obvious until you actually try to live it. And he teaches Finn about Joshua, their adoptive father, the legendary adventurer who raised them both before dying in a way the show never fully explains. In Dad's dungeon, Joshua's recorded voice guides Finn through trials designed to toughen him up, to prepare him for the dangerous world of who. Jake is there too, supporting Finn through their dead father's posthumous training program, but also dealing with his own complicated feelings about Joshua's harsh methods. The dungeon asks Finn to prove his worth through violence, through dominance, through traditionally masculine displays of strength. Finn struggles because he's 12 and small and still figuring out what kind of hero he wants to be. Jake struggles because he knows Joshua loved them, but also remembers the weight of his father's expectations, the pressure to be strong instead of vulnerable, capable instead of confused. The episode ends with Finn rejecting Joshua's final test, a message that says a true hero needs no friends. Finn refuses to abandon Jake, choosing brotherhood over his father's approval, and Jake is there, supporting that choice, validating that love matters more than inherited ideas about solitary heroism. That's growth for both of them. Finn learns to trust his own values over his father's ghost. Jake learns that being a brother means letting Finn make his own choices, even when those choices reject the lessons their father tried to impart. The beautiful thing about their relationship is how genuinely flawed it is. Jake isn't a perfect mentor. He lies to Finn constantly, small lies, usually, about where he's going or what he's doing or why he's ditching him for Lady Rainicorn. He prioritizes his romantic relationship over his brother more than once, leaving Finn to handle adventures solo while Jake plays video games with his girlfriend. He gives advice that contradicts his own behavior, preaching chill while secretly panicking about his own problems. In My Two Favorite People, Jake tries to balance time between Finn and Lady, failing at both because he's stretched too thin emotionally. The episode is about Jake learning he can't be everything to everyone, that even magical stretching has limits when you're talking about attention and presence. He hurts Finn by excluding him. He neglects Lady by being distracted. The resolution isn't Jake fixing everything perfectly, it's Jake admitting he messed up and trying to do better. That honesty makes their bond stronger than if Jake were a perfect role model. Finn doesn't need someone who has life figured out. He needs someone who admits when they're wrong, who models apology and growth, who shows that being flawed doesn't disqualify you from being loved. And Jake loves Finn completely, protectively, in ways that override his own survival instincts. Death in Bloom has Jake literally bargaining with death to save Finn's life, offering himself as collateral. When Finn dies, temporarily because death is complicated in Ooh, Jake goes to the literal embodiment of mortality and negotiates. He's terrified of death, has nightmares about cosmic owls and prophetic doom, but when Finn needs him, Jake walks into death's domain and plays a high-stakes game for his brother's soul. He wins, obviously, through a combination of cleverness and deep knowledge of obscure rules, but the willingness to try, to risk himself for Finn, that's the core of who Jake is. He'll stretch across any distance, face any fear, bend any rule if it means keeping his brother safe. The problem is Jake can't always keep him safe. Nobody can protect someone forever, especially not when that someone is actively seeking danger as a career choice. Finn grows up throughout the series, becoming more complex, more damaged, more aware of how broken the world actually is. He loses his arm, regains it, loses it again differently. He falls in love multiple times and gets hurt every time. He discovers his father is alive and then learns his father is a terrible person. He questions his purpose, his heroism, his place in you. He grows from a simple kid who wants to help people into a complicated young man trying to figure out what helping even means in a world this morally grey. And Jake is there for all of it, adapting his role as Finn matures. Early on, Jake is the fun older brother who makes adventures exciting. Middle seasons, he's the voice of reason tempering Finn's intensity. Later seasons, he's the support system helping Finn process trauma and loss and the weight of growing up in a world that keeps revealing new horrors. But Jake also needs Finn. It's not one-directional mentorship. Jake's entire identity is wrapped up in being Finn's brother. When Finn questions their relationship or pulls away, Jake spirals. He built his reformed life around this kid, this partnership, this shared purpose. Without Finn, who is Jake? Just a magic dog who used to be a criminal, aging out of relevance, watching his body slow down while his brother keeps growing. That's the darker undercurrent in their bond. Jake knows he won't live as long as Finn. dog years. Even magical ones run faster. He's already passed the halfway point of his life when the series starts. Every adventure might be one of his last chances to be there for Finn, to teach him something important, to make memories that will sustain Finn when Jake is gone. The show doesn't dwell on this explicitly until much later, but it's always there, lurking. Jake's occasional melancholy, his fear of being forgotten, his desperate need to matter to the people he loves, all of it traces back to knowing his time is limited and wanting to use it well. In Billy's bucket list, Jake deals with his own father issues by helping Billy, a legendary hero who became their mentor figure, complete his final wishes after death. The episode forces Jake to confront mortality again, to think about legacy and what you leave behind. Jake realizes he wants to leave Finn with more than just memories. He wants to leave him prepared, capable, strong enough to keep adventuring after Jake is gone. But how do you prepare someone for your own absence? How do you teach someone to live without you while you're still there teaching them? Jake doesn't figure this out. He just keeps showing up, keeps adventuring, keeps being present for as long as his body lets him. That's all any of us can do, really. Show up until we can't anymore. The communication between them is its own kind of magic. They finish each other's sentences, thoughts, sandwiches. They have entire conversations with just looks and gestures. They've developed a shorthand so efficient that sometimes they confuse other people by responding to things the other one only thought. It's borderline telepathic, this connection, built from years of shared experiences and absolute trust. But they also argue, constantly, about everything. Finn thinks Jake is too lazy. Jake thinks Finn is too intense. Finn wants to save everyone. Jake wants to nap. Finn believes in absolute good and evil. Jake sees complicated grey areas everywhere. Their worldviews clash regularly, but the clashing is part of how they refine each other. Finn makes Jake more active, more engaged with the world. Jake makes Finn more thoughtful, more willing to pause before acting. They sand down each other's rough edges through friction and love and 10,000 small disagreements that never threaten the foundation of what they are to each other. And what they are is family. Chosen, built, maintained through effort and forgiveness and showing up. They're brothers not because genetics says so, not because society defined their relationship, but because they decided to be. Every day, for years, they keep choosing each other. Even when it's hard, even when they're mad, even when Jake wants to be with Lady and Finn wants to save a kingdom solo. The treehouse becomes their shared space, their home base, the physical manifestation of their bond. It's cluttered with their combined stuff. Finn's hero equipment, Jake's instruments, video games, food, random magical artifacts. It's not fancy or organised. It's lived in, comfortable, theirs. When the treehouse gets destroyed in later seasons, the loss hits hard because it's not just a building. It's the place where they became brothers, where they built a life together after the world ended. They rebuild it. Of course they do. Because home isn't the structure, it's whoever you share it with. Adventure Time could have made Jake a simple sidekick, comic relief who exists to highlight Finn's heroism. Instead, the show made him an equal partner, a fully realised person with his own arc, his own struggles, his own life beyond just supporting Finn. But that life always circles back to Finn, always includes him, because Jake's choice to be a brother defines everything else he becomes. When Jake has kids, Finn becomes Uncle Finn. When Jake deals with his criminal past, Finn helps him face Tiffany. When Jake learns about Warren Ampersand, Finn is there to process it with him. Their lives are intertwined completely, two separate stories that make sense only when read together. In a world obsessed with destiny and prophecy, Finn and Jake prove that the strongest magic is choice. They chose each other. They keep choosing each other. Through apocalypses and heartbreaks and cosmic threats and personal failures, they show up for each other in ways that matter more than any spell or sword. Because at the end of the day, after all the adventures and lessons and growth, what Jake gave Finn wasn't just survival skills or hero training. He gave him something harder to quantify and impossible to replace. He gave him a safe person, someone who would never abandon him, never judge him too harshly, never stop believing he could be better. Jake the magic dog, former criminal and alien hybrid, taught Finn the human that you don't have to be alone just because the world ended. You can build something new, something better, with whoever's willing to build it with you. And maybe that's the real adventure, not the dungeons or the monsters or the princesses needing rescue. Maybe it's just finding someone who'll make you bacon pancakes when you're sad, who'll stretch across impossible distances to reach you, who'll stay in your corner even when you're wrong. Jake was that person for Finn. Brother, friend, teacher, student, partner in everything that mattered. In a show about growing up after the apocalypse, Jake kept Finn from growing up too fast, too hard, too alone. He was the buffer between childhood and adulthood, the safe space where Finn could still be a kid even while learning to be a hero. And when the time came for Finn to grow up anyway, to face the world's complexity without simple answers, Jake was still there. Older, greyer, slower, but present. Always present. Because that's what brothers do. They show up, they stretch, they stay. Jake the dog can become anything. Not metaphorically, not aspirationally, literally anything his imagination can picture and his body can stretch into. A boat crossing an ocean of poison, a key unlocking an ancient door, a brick floating through space toward prophetic death, a house sheltering his brother from rain, a meatloaf that someone definitely should not eat but probably will anyway. A staircase, a bridge, a rope, a shield, a weapon, a vehicle, a disguise, a telephone, a computer, a tree, a cloud, infinity itself. His power isn't just shape-shifting, it's reality bending contained in yellow fur and a goofy smile. While other characters in Ooh have specific magical abilities with defined parameters, Jake's power is essentially unlimited imagination made physical. If he can picture it, he can become it. And Jake's imagination is deeply weird, wonderfully surreal, and occasionally horrifying when you think about the implications too hard. But let's start with the rules, because even infinite flexibility has structure. Jake's mass stays relatively constant. When he stretches long, he gets thinner. When he compresses himself into something small, he gets denser. He can't create matter from nothing, or delete parts of himself without consequence. His body is a fixed amount of Jake stuff that can be rearranged into any configuration, but the total volume remains roughly the same, usually. The show is inconsistent about this because cartoon logic matters more than physics, but the general principle holds. Jake is working with what he's got, just redistributing it creatively. His organs can stretch independently. This is deeply unsettling when you think about it. Jake's heart can elongate while his brain stays normal-sized. His stomach can expand to hold massive amounts of food, while the rest of him remains unchanged. His eyes can stretch on stalks like some kind of biological periscope. Each part of his body has its own stretching capacity, its own flexibility, its own awareness. He's not just one consciousness piloting a stretchy meat suit. He's a collection of independently operating systems that somehow coordinate into a coherent person. When Jake splits into multiple copies of himself, each copy retains full consciousness and agency. They're all Jake, but they can disagree with each other, want different things, argue about who gets the last pancake. The episode where Jake splits into 5 copies to spend time with all his pups individually shows this perfectly. Each Jake has the same memories and personality, but they start developing slightly different priorities based on which pup they're with. Eventually they have to remerge because being split creates internal conflict. Too many Jakes wanting too many things. Unity requires being singular, even if singular means containing multitudes. He can change his density and composition to phase through solid objects by making himself porous. He can become so thin he's practically two-dimensional. He can inflate himself into a balloon and float. He can grow to massive sizes or shrink to microscopic dimensions. He can maintain complex shapes for extended periods or shift rapidly between forms. The versatility is genuinely staggering when you catalogue everything Jake does across 10 seasons. But here's what makes Jake's power unique among the shapeshifters of Ooh. It's generous. Compare him to Warren Ampersand, the alien who gave Jake his abilities through that parasitic bite. Warren shapeshifts to consume, to hide, to attack. His transformations are predatory. He becomes whatever lets him hurt you most efficiently. Same basic power as Jake, completely opposite application. Or look at Marceline, who can transform into various monstrous forms. Bats, wolves, tentacled horrors from the nitosphere. Her shapeshifting is protective, defensive, a way to access different aspects of her power. She becomes dangerous things because the world is dangerous and she needs to match it. Her transformations are armor. Magic Man can alter his shape too, but his changes are chaotic, random tools of torment. He transforms himself and others as pranks, as torture, as demonstrations of his reality-warping abilities. His shape-shifting is fundamentally cruel. Jake's shape-shifting is service. He becomes what others need. A boat when they need to cross water, a shelter when they need protection, a key when they need access, a bridge when they need to reach something, a hug when they need comfort. Literally, Jake can wrap himself around someone and become a full-body embrace. His power adapts to solve problems, to help people, to make situations better. That's not an inherent property of shape-shifting. That's Jake choosing what to do with his abilities. He could become weapons constantly, turn himself into instruments of destruction, use his powers to dominate and control like Warren does. Instead, he becomes furniture when BMO needs a friend, becomes a ladder when Finn needs height, becomes a wall when candy people need defense. The power is neutral. Jake makes it kind. But kindness has limits, and the Limit episode explores what happens when even Jake's seemingly infinite flexibility hits a wall. The episode has Finn and Jake journeying through a labyrinth where Jake has to keep stretching to reach the next platform, extend the next bridge, create the next pathway. He stretches and stretches and stretches, pushing himself further than he's ever gone, maintaining increasingly complex shapes under growing strain. And then he breaks. Not physically, though his body does start glitching, trembling, losing cohesion. The breakdown is psychological. Jake reaches his maximum capacity, and his mind fractures under the pressure of holding himself together. He hallucinates, panics, becomes unable to maintain even his basic dog shape. His body reverts to a formless blob because his consciousness can no longer direct it. The episode is terrifying because it reveals that Jake's power isn't truly infinite, it's vast, but bounded by his mental and physical endurance. There's a limit to how far anyone can stretch before they snap. Even someone like Jake, whose entire existence is about flexibility and adaptation. Push hard enough, long enough, and even elastic breaks. The recovery takes time. Jake has to rest, rebuild his sense of self, remember how to be Jake-shaped instead of Jake-scattered. It's a reminder that powers are exhausting, that magic costs energy, that even the most adaptable person has edges they can't safely cross. After the Limit, Jake is more cautious about overextending. He still stretches for others, still bends himself into helpful shapes, but he's learned to feel for boundaries before he hits them. Growth through pain, wisdom through breaking. Very Jake. The existential implications of his power are wild when you sit with them. If you can become literally anything, who are you really? What's the core self beneath all the shapes? When Jake becomes a house, is he a dog pretending to be a house, or is he genuinely house-shaped for that moment? Where does Jake end and the transformation begin? Most shapeshifters in fiction struggle with this question. They lose themselves in their forms, forget their original shape, question which version is real. But Jake never seems confused about his identity. No matter what shape he takes, he's always fundamentally Jake. His consciousness doesn't fragment or blur. He's Jake as boat, Jake as brick, Jake as meatloaf, but the Jake part never wavers. That's philosophically fascinating. It suggests identity isn't about physical form, but about consciousness, continuity, the thread of awareness that persists through change. Jake has solved the ship of Theseus paradox by being the ship, the original parts, and the replacement parts simultaneously. He contains all his shapes without being defined by any single one. His power reflects his personality perfectly, adaptable, flexible, able to fit any situation without losing himself. Where other characters have rigid identities that conflict with the world's demands, Jake flows. He bends instead of breaking. He adapts instead of resisting. Not because he's spineless, but because he's secure enough in who he is to let his surface change without threatening his core. But the surreal applications of his powers are where things get really weird. Jake doesn't just become practical objects, he becomes abstract concepts made flesh. In Mystery Train, Jake becomes an entire working train, Multiple connected cars, passengers, conductor, the whole locomotive. His body segments into a massive vehicle that can hold other people inside him while he moves along tracks. Imagine the body horror of that from Jake's perspective. Imagine feeling yourself as train cars, as wheels, as smokestack, as cabin, all at once, maintaining dozens of simultaneous shapes while pretending to be mysterious for Finn's birthday surprise. He becomes a door in the creeps, turning his body into a functional entrance that others walk through. There's something deeply weird about using your friend as architecture, about stepping through Jake's stretched flat body like it's a normal doorway. But nobody in OO blinks at it because Jake is always willing to be furniture if the situation calls for it. The time he becomes a tiny brick to sneak into the Fire Kingdom with Finn, both of them hiding inside Flame Princess's lantern. Jake compressed himself into something pocket-sized, maintaining full awareness while being basically inanimate. That's trust, letting yourself become an object depending on others to keep you safe while you're immobilized by your own power. Or when he grows so large he can't fit through doorways, so massive his head scrapes clouds. The show plays it for laughs, but scale shifting is conceptually intense. Your body expanding to hundreds of times its normal size, your organs stretching to accommodate, your consciousness somehow maintaining awareness of every inch of your expanded form. That's not just physical transformation, that's perceptual overload that Jake handles with casual grace. The Molecular Universe episode takes it even further. Jake shrinks so small he enters a universe existing on a tiny speck, where entire civilizations live and die in spaces smaller than atoms. He becomes small enough to interact with subatomic reality, experiencing time differently, existing at a scale where normal physics don't apply. Then he grows back to normal size, bringing the tiny civilization with him by accident, causing an existential crisis for beings who didn't know they were microscopic. Jake's power lets him access infinite scales of reality, from cosmic to subatomic, and his brain just adjusts. No mental breakdown from experiencing multiple dimensions of existence. No trauma from being simultaneously massive and microscopic. He just does it, then complains about being hungry because shapeshifting burns calories. The splitting power deserves special attention because it raises questions about consciousness and individuality. When Jake splits into 5 copies, are they 5 Jakes or 1 Jake experiencing 5 simultaneous perspectives? The show suggests it's both somehow. They're independent entities with individual thoughts and desires, but they share underlying identity and memories. They can argue with each other, but ultimately want what's best for the collective Jake. When they remerge, do the individual Jakes die, or do they rejoin into unified experience? Jake doesn't seem traumatized by splitting and merging, suggesting it's more like distributed consciousness than actual individuation. He becomes temporarily plural, then singular again, no existential crisis required. But imagine experiencing that, being 1 person, then 5, then 1 again, holding 5 conversations simultaneously from 5 perspectives, making 5 different choices that might conflict, then integrating all that experience back into singular awareness. That's not just power. That's cognitive flexibility bordering on plural consciousness. The show never fully explores the psychological implications, probably because it would get dark fast, but it's there, lurking under the comedy. Jake's power lets him be multiple people with one identity, and he handles it with the same casual grace he brings to everything else. His relationship with his own body is uniquely non-attached. Most people are stuck with their shape, build identity around physical constants, develop body image issues based on fixed forms. Jake has none of that. His body is a tool he uses, not a prison he inhabits. He can be beautiful, ugly, functional, decorative, whatever the moment requires. Physical insecurity doesn't exist when you can literally reshape yourself into anything. But that flexibility comes with its own challenges. If you can be anything, how do you choose what to be? Jake defaults to his dog form because it's comfortable, familiar, the shape that feels most like home. But it's still a choice. Every morning, Jake wakes up and chooses to be dog-shaped instead of brick-shaped or meatloaf-shaped or infinity-shaped. That's a level of existential freedom most people can't imagine. And sometimes that freedom is burden. When you can solve any problem by becoming the right shape, it's hard to say no. People need a bridge? Jake becomes one. Someone needs transportation? Jake becomes a car. The Candy Kingdom needs defenses. Jake becomes a wall. His power makes him useful in ways that demand constant availability. Being infinitely flexible means people expect you to bend. My two favourite people touches on this when Jake tries to be everything to everyone and fails. He wants to adventure with Finn and romance Lady Rainicorn simultaneously, so he keeps splitting his attention and presence until both relationships suffer. The episode's resolution isn't Jake learning to stretch better. It's Jake learning that some things require you to be fully present, singular, undivided. Sometimes the kindest thing is choosing one shape and maintaining it, even if you could be multiple shapes at once. That's emotional maturity disguised as cartoon logic. Jake's power teaches him that boundaries matter, that choosing what not to become is as important as choosing what to become. The philosophical question persists, though. If you can be anything, who are you really? Jake answers by staying fundamentally Jake regardless of shape. His personality, values, relationships, sense of humour, none of it changes when his body does. The shape is surface, the self is deeper, in a land where identity is constantly questioned, where Finn struggles with being the last human, where Marceline wrestles with her demon heritage, where Princess Bubblegum questions what it means to be sentient candy. Jake solved identity by deciding it isn't about shape. It's about what you do with the shapes you can take. It's about choosing kindness when you could choose harm. It's about using infinite possibility to help instead of hurt. Warren Ampersand gave Jake the power to become anything. Joshua and Margaret taught him what to become. Finn showed him why it matters. Lady Rainicorn gave him someone to stretch toward. His kids showed him that power passes on, but choices remain individual. Jake the Magic Dog can become infinity itself. He does in several episodes, stretching into abstract concepts and impossible geometries. But he always comes back to being dog-shaped, brother-shaped, father-shaped, friend-shaped. Because those are the shapes that matter most. The real magic isn't that Jake can become anything. It's that with infinite options, he chooses to become whatever helps the people he loves. That's not a power, that's character. And maybe that's the answer to the existential question. You're not defined by what you can do or what shape you take. You're defined by what you choose when you have infinite choices. Jake chose kindness. He chose presence. He chose to stretch himself for others even when it hurt, even when it reached his limit, even when being singular and selfish would be easier. In a world that demands you pick one identity and stick with it, Jake proved you can be everything and still be yourself. The trick is knowing which self matters most, which shape serves best, which version of you the moment needs, and then becoming that, fully, without reservation, until it's time to be something else. That's not just stretching, that's wisdom in elastic form. Jake learns Korean in his 20s for a girl who's half rainbow, half unicorn, and speaks exactly zero English. That's love. Not the easy kind where you share a language and culture and species. The hard kind where you have to fundamentally reshape how you communicate, because someone matters enough to make the effort worthwhile. Lady Rainicorn speaks Korean, sees in infrared, flies through the sky on impossible physics, and comes from a species that fought a war against dogs. Jake is a magic dog who can barely commit to finishing a sandwich without getting distracted. On paper, this relationship is disaster waiting to happen. But Adventure Time isn't about what makes sense on paper. It's about what makes sense in the heart. Their relationship starts in the early episodes as background romance, the established couple that provides stability, while Finn navigates his messy crush on Princess Bubblegum. Jake and Lady are already together when the show begins, already past the awkward early stages, already comfortable in their dynamic. They fly around, have picnics in the clouds, communicate in a mixture of English and Korean that somehow works despite neither being fluent in the other's native tongue. The language barrier should be insurmountable. Lady speaks only Korean throughout the entire series, never learning English even though she clearly understands it. Jake learns Korean specifically for her, though his grasp remains imperfect, often requiring translation or context clues to follow conversations. Their kids will speak primarily Korean initially, creating another layer of linguistic complexity. But somehow, impossibly, they understand each other perfectly. That's the show's thesis about love in microcosm. Communication isn't just about words, it's about effort, attention, willingness to meet someone in their language even when it's hard. Jake could have dated someone easier, someone who spoke his language and shared his species. Instead, he chose someone who required him to grow, to learn, to stretch beyond his comfort zone in ways that had nothing to do with his powers. Lady chose him too, which is equally improbable. Her species fought a war against dogs, generations of conflict and mistrust built into cultural memory. Dating Jake isn't just cross-species romance, it's borderline treason in some Rainicorn circles. But Lady sees past species, past history, past all the reasons they shouldn't work. She sees Jake, goofy, loyal, deeply weird Jake, and decides he's worth it. Their relationship is Adventure Time's most functional romance, which makes it quietly revolutionary in a show filled with complicated, messy, often toxic relationships. Princess Bubblegum and Marceline take literal centuries to work through their issues. Finn's relationships are disasters of miscommunication and incompatible maturity levels. Ice King's entire existence is obsessive, boundary-violating pursuit of companionship. Against this backdrop of romantic dysfunction, Jake and Lady are stable, communicative, genuinely happy together. They have problems, obviously. My two favourite people shows Jake struggling to balance time between Lady and Finn, trying to give both relationships adequate attention and failing, because he's spreading himself too thin. But the conflict resolution is healthy, mature, honest. Jake apologises, explains his feelings, works to find compromise. Lady expresses her needs clearly. They navigate the problem together instead of letting it fester into resentment. That's not dramatic television. It's functional adult relationship dynamics. The show rewards them for it by making their romance the stable foundation Jake builds everything else on. Then Lady gets pregnant, and Jake absolutely loses his mind. Jake the Dad is existential terror disguised as a cute episode about impending fatherhood. Jake discovers Lady is pregnant, the egg already laid, gestation happening fast because Rainicorn biology moves at accelerated pace, and immediately spirals into panic about everything he doesn't know how to do. How do you raise kids when you barely feel like an adult yourself? How do you teach someone else how to live when you're still figuring it out? What if you mess them up? What if you're not enough? These are universal fears dressed in cartoon absurdity. Jake processes impending fatherhood the way he processes everything, by catastrophizing, seeking advice from questionable sources, and ultimately realizing he has to figure it out himself. The episode has Jake researching parenting, reading books about child development, consulting with other parents in OO. Everyone gives contradicting advice. Be strict, be relaxed, provide structure, allow freedom, protect them from everything, let them learn through experience. The cacophony of parenting philosophies overwhelms Jake until he realizes there's no single correct approach. You just do your best and hope it's enough. When the pups are born, 5 hybrid dog Rainicorn babies that defy biological categorization, Jake's panic transforms into purpose. He becomes intensely protective, building elaborate safety systems in the treehouse, cushioning every sharp corner, trying to control an inherently chaotic situation. He's terrified of failing them, of being the kind of father who isn't present or capable or wise enough. But then the pups start growing, rapidly. Rainicorn aging means they mature from infants to toddlers, to children to teenagers in what feels like days from Jake's perspective. He barely has time to adjust to having babies before they're talking, walking, developing distinct personalities and interests. The accelerated timeline compresses parenthood into concentrated experience, forcing Jake to adapt faster than he's comfortable with. The 5 pups each represent different aspects of their parents' genetics and personalities, hybrid creatures that are neither fully dog nor fully Rainicorn but something new entirely. Charlie is the free spirit, the artist, the one who wants to explore and create without constraints. She has Lady's grace and Jake's creativity, becoming a musician and adventurer in her own right. She loves her parents, but needs independence, space to figure out who she is separate from their expectations. TV is the pragmatic one, emotionally intelligent and career-focused. He becomes an actor, starring in a detective show, building a life in the entertainment industry. He inherited Jake's ability to read situations and adapt, combined with Lady's elegance. He maintains close relationships with his parents while establishing clear boundaries about his own autonomy. Viola works with Charlie at a hospital, dedicated to helping others, combining inherited medical instincts with genuine compassion. She's quieter than her siblings, more introspective, the kind of person who processes feelings internally before expressing them. She got Jake's loyalty and Lady's nurturing instincts, becoming someone who heals instead of fighting. Jake Jr. inherits the criminal tendencies Jake thought he'd left behind. She's rebellious, drawn to chaos and rule-breaking, running with gangs and causing trouble in ways that terrify Jake because he recognizes himself in her behavior. She's the reminder that genetics and environment both matter, that you can try to guide your kids toward goodness, but ultimately they make their own choices. And then there's Kim Kil-wan, the businessman, the responsible one, the pup who grew up too fast and resents his father for it. Ocarina is one of Adventure Time's most emotionally complex episodes because it forces Jake to confront his failures as a parent through Kim Kil-wan's legitimate grievances. Kim Kil-wan bought the treehouse, Jake and Finn's home, as an investment property, planning to rent it out for profit. When Jake protests, Kim Kil-wan explodes with accumulated resentment about Jake's irresponsible parenting. Jake's philosophy was always let them be free, let them figure it out, give them space to be cool. He didn't impose structure or discipline or practical life lessons. He gave his kids love and acceptance and freedom, thinking that was enough. But for Kim Kil-wan, that freedom felt like neglect. He needed guidance, structure, someone to teach him how to navigate the world's practical realities. Instead, he got a father who was present but perpetually chill, loving but never quite serious enough about the hard stuff. The confrontation is brutal in its honesty. Kim Kil-wan calls Jake out for being a man-child, for never growing up enough to provide real parenting, for treating fatherhood like another adventure instead of a responsibility. And Jake, to his credit, listens. He doesn't defend himself or make excuses. He admits he messed up, that his approach to parenting wasn't enough for every kid, that he failed Kim Kil-wan by being too hands-off. The episode ends with tentative reconciliation. Kim Kil-wan agrees to let Jake and Finn keep living in the treehouse rent-free. Jake agrees to actually try harder, to be more present in ways that matter to his kids instead of assuming his version of love is sufficient. It's growth earned through painful honesty, the kind of character development that only happens when you face the ways you've hurt people you love. The other pups have their own relationships with Jake, less fraught than Kim Kil-wan's but still complex. Jake Jr.'s criminal behavior forces Jake to decide how to handle a child who's making the same mistakes he made at her age. Does he come down hard, try to prevent her from experiencing the consequences he experienced? Or does he trust that she'll figure it out the same way he did, through pain and eventual growth? He tries the trust approach, giving Jake Jr. space to make mistakes while remaining available if she needs him. It's terrifying watching your kid walk a dangerous path knowing intervention might push her further away. But Jake learned from Kim Kil-wan that imposing his will doesn't work. His kids have to choose their own paths, even when those paths look destructive. TV's success in entertainment is easier to support but comes with its own challenges. Fame changes people, creates distance between family members who exist in different social spheres. Jake worries about losing connection with TV. As his career takes off, about becoming irrelevant to a son who's outgrown needing a father's guidance. But TV maintains the relationship, inviting Jake to visit his set, introducing him to colleagues, keeping him involved despite their different lifestyles. Charlie and Viola working together at the hospital makes Jake proud in ways he doesn't fully articulate. They're helping people, using their hybrid abilities for good, building lives centered on compassion and service. That's the legacy Jake hoped to pass on, not his powers, not his heroism, but his commitment to using whatever you have to make things better for others. But here's the complicated truth about Jake as a father. He's not great at it. He tries, loves his kids fiercely, wants the best for them. But his parenting is inconsistent, often absent, shaped by his own unresolved issues and fear of being too controlling. He gives them freedom because he craves freedom himself. He avoids structure because structure feels constraining. He parents from his own needs instead of adapting to theirs, and that's deeply human, or dog, or whatever Jake is. Parents are just people trying their best with limited tools and generational baggage. Jake was adopted, raised by adventurer parents who loved him, but also lied about his origins for decades. He inherited their approach to parenting: be brave, learn through experience, face danger head-on, without examining whether that's what his own kids need. The beauty of Adventure Time is that it doesn't punish Jake for imperfect parenting. His kids grow up complicated, struggling, successful, troubled, functional, dysfunctional, all the messy variations of being alive. They're not better or worse for having Jake as a father. They're just themselves, shaped by his influence but ultimately autonomous. Jake's relationship with Lady remains the stable centre through all this parenting chaos. She's patient with his panic, supportive of his efforts, clear about her own needs. They parent together but not identically, complementing each other's approaches instead of trying to enforce unified strategy. When Jake spirals about being a bad father, Lady reminds him that showing up matters more than being perfect. Their communication across the language barrier becomes metaphor for all relationship communication. You don't need to speak the same language to understand each other. You need attention, care, willingness to interpret generously instead of assuming the worst. Lady and Jake speak different languages, come from different species, have fundamentally different worldviews. But they work because they prioritize understanding over being understood, connection over being right. The surreal comedy of their relationship is the show's signature weirdness. 5 rapidly aging hybrid dog Rainicorn babies who speak primarily Korean, growing from infants to teenagers in accelerated montage sequences. Jake teaching them to play card games before they can walk. Lady feeding them while flying, her long unicorn body wrapping around multiple pups simultaneously. Family dinners where half the conversation is in Korean, half in English, everyone understanding through context and love. But underneath the weirdness is genuine emotional depth. Jake learns that loving someone beyond yourself means accepting. You can't be everything they need. He can't solve all his kids' problems. He can't prevent them from making mistakes. He can't protect Lady from every danger or meet every emotional need. He can only show up, consistently, imperfectly, trying. That's harder than any adventure. Fighting the Lich is simpler than being present when your daughter tells you she resents how you raised her. Saving candy people from zombies is easier than admitting to your son that you weren't the father he needed. Stretching across kingdoms is less exhausting than stretching emotionally to meet 5 different kids where they are, respecting their autonomy while offering guidance they may not want. Jake chose the hard thing. He chose to be present, to try, to fail, and apologize, and keep trying. He chose Lady knowing the relationship would require constant effort, constant translation, constant work. He chose to have kids knowing he'd probably mess them up in some ways, that his best wouldn't be enough for everyone, and he did mess up. Kim Kil-whan's pain is real. Jake Jr.'s criminal behavior reflects parenting gaps. The rapid aging meant Jake barely had time to adjust to each stage before his kids moved past it. He wasn't ready for fatherhood, wasn't wise enough or mature enough or consistent enough. He brought all his flaws to parenting and hoped love would compensate. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. But here's what Jake got right. He never stopped trying. When Kim Kil-whan confronted him, Jake didn't get defensive or dismissive. He listened, apologized, tried to do better. When Jake Jr. got into trouble, he didn't abandon her or pretend she wasn't his problem. He stayed available, maintained connection even when her choices hurt him. When his other kids found success, he celebrated without trying to take credit or make it about him. Jake learned you can stretch across mountains but still not reach everyone. Love isn't about being everything. It's about showing up as yourself, flawed and trying, and trusting that consistent imperfect presence beats perfect occasional involvement. Lady taught him that. She never demanded Jake be perfect. She demanded he be present, show up for the kids, learn their language, literally and emotionally, try to understand them. Accept you'll fail sometimes. Keep trying anyway. That's the legacy Jake leaves his kids. Not powers or wisdom or wealth, but the example of someone who admits when he's wrong, who tries to repair harm he causes, who loves messily instead of perfectly. His kids inherit his stretching abilities, but more importantly they inherit his capacity for growth, his willingness to change, his commitment to showing up even when it's hard. In a world that demands perfect parents or no parents at all, Jake proved you can be deeply flawed and still raise kids who turn out okay. Not because you did everything right, but because you did enough things right enough of the time and apologized for the rest. Maybe that's all any parent can do. Be present. Admit mistakes. Keep loving even when you're tired, even when you're scared, even when you're not sure you're doing it right. Trust that showing up matters more than showing up perfectly. Jake the Magic Dog, former criminal and alien hybrid, learned that the hardest shape to maintain isn't infinity or a brick or a house. It's being a father who's good enough, a partner who tries hard enough, a person who loves beyond his own capacity to be perfect. And somehow, through accumulated imperfect effort, that became enough. Jake the dog once told Finn that sucking at something is the first step to being sorta good at something. That sentence changed lives. Not metaphorically, literally, actual human lives outside the show. People got that quote tattooed on their bodies, teachers wrote it on classroom walls, therapists quoted it to clients struggling with perfectionism. A throwaway line from a magic dog about being bad at stuff became genuine philosophical guidance for a generation raised to believe failure was unacceptable. And Jake said it while eating a sandwich, barely paying attention, dropping profound wisdom like crumbs. That's Jake's entire approach to philosophy. Stumble into truth while doing something else, speak it plainly without academic pretension, then immediately undercut the seriousness with a fart joke or surreal observation about sandwiches having feelings. He's Adventure Time's unlikely spiritual centre, the character who understands reality is flexible, and meaning is whatever you make it, all while maintaining he's just a dog who likes naps and doesn't know much about anything. The wisdom of not knowing. That's Jake's philosophy in 4 words. While Princess Bubblegum approaches problems through science and control, while Marceline processes centuries of accumulated knowledge and trauma, while Finn tries to hero his way through moral complexity, Jake just exists. He doesn't pretend to have answers. He admits when he's confused. He's comfortable with uncertainty in ways that terrify everyone else. And somehow that comfort with not knowing makes him the wisest person in you. Consider Rainy Day Daydream, an episode where Jake's imagination becomes so powerful it manifests physically, turning his daydreams into reality. He imagines monsters and they appear. He pictures impossible scenarios and they happen. His internal world bleeds into external reality because in Ooh, the line between imagination and manifestation is thinner than most places. The episode forces Jake to confront the power of his own mind, the way thoughts become things when you stop policing the boundary between mental and physical. Most people would panic. Jake treats it like an interesting puzzle, then gets bored and decides to nap instead. The solution comes when he stops trying to control his imagination and just lets it flow naturally. Fighting the manifestations makes them stronger. Accepting them makes them harmless. It's accidental Buddhism. Jake discovers non-attachment by being too lazy to attach to outcomes. Or look at The Witch's Garden, where Jake gets cursed for stealing from a witch's garden. He sprouts a mushroom from his head that makes him compulsively honest and paranoid. The mushroom is his own repressed anxieties manifesting physically, every fear and insecurity he usually ignores suddenly given voice and form. Most episodes would resolve this through external solution. Find the witch, break the curse, remove the mushroom. Instead, Jake has to face himself. Literally confront his own shadow self, the parts of him he doesn't want to acknowledge. His fear of being inadequate, his worry that he's not good enough for Lady or Finn or anyone, his terror of death and meaninglessness. The mushroom forces Jake to encounter everything he's been avoiding through chill vibes and strategic napping. He survives by accepting it. Not fighting the anxious thoughts, not trying to suppress the mushroom but acknowledging that fear is part of him and that's okay. The curse breaks when Jake stops resisting his own darkness. It's shadow work disguised as cartoon hijinks about a talking mushroom making a dog paranoid. That's deep. That's therapy. That's Jake accidentally doing the psychological integration most people need years of counselling to achieve, and he does it because the plot demanded it. And also he really wants the mushroom gone so he can eat normal food again. His mantras become legendary precisely because they're simple. Dude, sucking at something is the first step to being sorta good at something. It's not eloquent or academic. It's Jake speak, casual and goofy. But it contains revolutionary acceptance of failure as necessary step toward growth. In 3 seconds, Jake dismantles perfectionism, validates struggle, and gives permission to be bad at things without shame. Or his advice about being yourself. Just be you. You'll be bad at it at first, but you'll get better. Again, stupid simple. But think about what he's saying. Being yourself is a skill you develop through practice. You're not born knowing who you are. You figure it out by trying different versions and seeing what feels right. And you'll suck at being yourself initially because nobody starts out authentic. You have to learn it. That's not obvious wisdom. That's hard-won understanding of identity formation dressed in 12 words and a goofy smile. Jake's approach to problems is its own form of philosophy. When faced with difficult situations, he typically does one of three things: eats something, takes a nap, or does something completely unrelated until inspiration hits. This sounds like avoidance. It's actually sophisticated problem-solving through lateral thinking and subconscious processing. Western culture loves active problem-solving. Attack the issue head-on, make plans, execute strategy, force solutions through willpower and effort. Jake does the opposite. He steps back, lets his subconscious work on it, trusts that answers emerge when you stop forcing them. That's Taoist Wu Wei, effortless action, going with the flow, allowing rather than controlling. When Finn is stressed about something, Jake makes bacon pancakes. Not because bacon pancakes solve the problem, but because sometimes you need to eat bacon pancakes before your brain can process complexity. Nourishment, comfort, the small ritual of cooking and eating together. These create space for insight to arrive naturally. When they're stuck in a dungeon, Jake suggests napping. Finn protests because heroes don't nap during quests. But Jake understands that exhausted brains make poor decisions. Rest isn't weakness. It's strategic recovery that makes you more effective later. He's not lazy. He's energy efficient. When they can't figure out how to proceed, Jake starts playing viola or making up songs or discussing completely unrelated topics. This seems like distraction. It's actually pattern breaking, forcing the brain out of stuck loops by introducing new stimuli. Sometimes the answer to a problem exists outside the problem's framework. You have to look away to see it. This connects directly to Buddhism and Taoism, though Jake has definitely never read Buddhist texts or Taoist philosophy. He just lives it instinctively. The concept of Wu Wei, action through non-action, accomplishing by not forcing, describes Jake's entire approach to life. He doesn't push against reality. He flows with it, adapts to its shape, becomes what the moment needs without resistance. Buddhist non-attachment shows up constantly in Jake's behaviour. He loves deeply, but holds loosely. When his kids grow up and leave, he's sad but doesn't try to keep them. When Lady needs space, he gives it without resentment. When Finn goes through phases where he's distant or difficult, Jake maintains presence without demanding reciprocation. He wants things but doesn't cling to outcomes. The Buddhist acceptance of impermanence defines Jake's entire relationship with mortality. He knows he's dying, not metaphorically, literally, constantly like everyone, but faster because dog years accelerate the process. And instead of spending his limited time panicking about it, he decides to live so fully that death becomes just another thing that happens. The New Frontier explores this directly through Jake's prophetic dream about dying in space. The cosmic owl appears, a being whose dreams always come true, whose prophecies are unavoidable fate. The owl shows Jake his death, becoming a brick, floating in space, alone, dead. That's it. No drama, no heroic sacrifice, just death as mundane event that happens to everyone eventually. Most people would spiral into existential crisis. Jake spends the entire episode terrified, trying to avoid space, refusing missions that might lead to the prophecy's fulfillment. He builds a card house to stay grounded. He becomes increasingly paranoid and controlling. The more he tries to avoid fate, the more constrained his life becomes. Then something shifts. Jake accepts it. Not in a defeated way, but with genuine peace. If he's going to die in space as a brick, fine. At least he knows. At least he can stop worrying about the unknown and just live until it happens. The prophecy doesn't change, but his relationship to it transforms from terror to acceptance. That's the entire Buddhist path in one episode. Suffering comes from resistance. Peace comes from acceptance. Jake can't control when or how he dies. He can only control whether he spends his remaining time afraid or present. He chooses present. The episode ends ambiguously. We never see whether the prophecy comes true in that specific moment. It doesn't matter. What matters is Jake stopped running from death and started living despite it. That's enlightenment. Cartoon style. Contrast this with Finn's approach to problems. Finn wants to fix everything, save every princess, defeat every villain, right every wrong. His heroism is active, interventionist, based on belief that good people should force good outcomes through courage and action. It's noble, it's exhausting. It's fundamentally at odds with accepting that some things can't be fixed. Jake knows some things can't be fixed. They can only be experienced, endured, accepted. When Finn's heart gets broken by Flame Princess, Jake doesn't try to fix it. He sits with Finn in the pain, makes bacon pancakes, reminds him that heartbreak is part of loving, and you do it anyway because the alternative is never loving at all. That's wisdom Finn can't access yet because he's still young enough to believe willpower conquers everything. Jake has lived long enough to know better. Willpower helps, action matters, but some problems don't have solutions, some pain doesn't have purpose, some questions don't have answers, and that's okay. You can be happy anyway, you can be good anyway, you can keep trying anyway. The surreal aspects of Jake's philosophy are where things get wonderfully weird. His conversation with his own belly button about the cosmic owl is pure Adventure Time nonsense. Jake's navel has opinions about prophetic dreams, and Jake treats this as completely normal. But underneath the absurdity is real exploration of talking to yourself, listening to instinct, recognizing that different parts of your psyche might have different wisdom to offer. When Jake becomes one with Sandwich, achieving temporary unity with his food, it's comedy. But it's also meditation practice, the dissolution of subject-object boundaries, the experience of non-duality where there's no separation between eater and eaten. Jake experiences enlightenment through Sandwich, and doesn't even realize it's enlightenment. He just thinks it's a really good sandwich. His explanation of Lady's feelings to Finn involves increasingly complex metaphors about colours and temperatures, and abstract sensations that make no literal sense, but somehow communicate emotional truth. Jake understands that feelings aren't logical. You can't explain them rationally. You can only gesture toward them with weird comparisons and hope the other person gets it through intuitive understanding rather than intellectual comprehension. That's what makes Jake such an effective guide for Finn and others. He doesn't lecture. He doesn't explain properly. He just offers observations and trusts people to extract whatever meaning they need. His teaching style is non-directive, open-ended, based on faith that everyone has their own path to wisdom, and his job is just to point in interesting directions occasionally. When BMO asks Jake about the meaning of life, Jake doesn't give a grand philosophical answer. He says something like, "Be cool and make sandwiches," and BMO takes that seriously because Jake delivers it seriously. The meaning isn't in the specific words, it's in Jake's genuine belief that simple pleasures and kindness are sufficient foundations for existence. You don't need complicated philosophy. You need bacon, friends, and willingness to help when people need you. That's radical simplicity in a world that demands complicated justifications for living. Jake just lives. He enjoys things. He helps people. He admits when he's wrong. He keeps showing up. No grand theory of meaning required. The meaning is in the showing up itself. His comfort with paradox is particularly Buddhist. Jake contains contradictions without needing to resolve them. He's lazy and heroic, cowardly and brave, simple and profound, selfish and generous. These aren't problems to solve. They're human complexity, or dog complexity, or alien dog hybrid complexity. He's all these things simultaneously, and that's fine. Consistency is overrated. Life is messy and contradictory and beautiful in its refusal to fit neat categories. The wisdom of not knowing means being okay with ambiguity. Jake doesn't pretend to understand the universe's plan or ooze deeper mysteries. He encounters magic, time travel, alternate dimensions, cosmic entities, and his reaction is usually, that's weird, followed by acceptance. Nothing surprises him because he's already accepted reality as fundamentally surprising. Once you internalize that baseline weirdness is normal, nothing specific seems particularly strange. In Puhoi, Jake supports Finn through an entire imaginary lifetime lived inside a pillow fort. Finn experiences decades of life, gets married, has kids, grows old, and dies, all in what might be his imagination, or might be an alternate reality, or might be both simultaneously. When Finn returns to normal time, confused and disoriented, Jake doesn't question or doubt. He just accepts Finn had that experience and helps him process it. Jake doesn't need to understand whether it was real or imaginary to validate Finn's feelings about it. The experience mattered to Finn. That's enough. Reality's negotiable anyway, and what counts is how you feel and what you do with those feelings. Jake knows this instinctively. His relationship with his own mortality gets darker as the series progresses. Early seasons, Jake treats death as distant abstraction. Later seasons, he's greying, slowing down, experiencing his body's decline in real time. Dog years mean he's aging faster than Finn, approaching middle age while his brother is still basically a teenager. The end is visible on the horizon. And Jake doesn't rail against it. He doesn't seek immortality or try to extend his life through magic. He just lives harder, more present, more committed to enjoying whatever time remains. Every adventure becomes more precious because there are fewer left. Every moment with Finn or Lady or his kids matters more because he knows he won't have infinite moments. That's not morbid. That's mindfulness. Death gives life urgency and meaning. If Jake lived forever, he could procrastinate experience, delay connection, assume there's always more time. Mortality forces presence. Jake has to be here now because now is all he definitely has. The show's ending strongly suggests Jake does die before Finn, that the Cosmic Owl's prophecy or something like it comes true eventually. Jake dies and Finn has to keep adventuring without him. That's the tragedy underlying their entire relationship. They're brothers on different timescales, one aging out while the other is still growing in. But Jake prepares Finn for this. Not explicitly, not with big speeches about death and legacy, just by modelling how to be present, how to love without clinging, how to enjoy life while accepting its impermanence. When Jake does die, Finn will be devastated. But he'll also be prepared, because Jake spent years showing him that love continues even when presence ends. In a world obsessed with answers, Jake taught a generation that sometimes the wisdom is in admitting you don't know. You don't know why the universe exists or what happens after death or whether your choices matter cosmically. You just have this moment, these people you love, this opportunity to be kind or cruel or indifferent. What you do with not knowing defines you more than what you know. Jake chose kindness in the face of uncertainty. He chose presence despite impermanence. He chose to stretch himself for others even when he couldn't be sure it mattered. That's faith, but not religious faith. Existential faith that acting with love is worthwhile regardless of cosmic reward or punishment. Maybe the secret isn't finding wisdom. Maybe it's recognizing you're already surrounded by it, that every moment contains teaching if you're paying attention. Jake learned from bacon pancakes and his kids, and prophetic dreams, and Lady Rainicorn's patient love. Wisdom wasn't in some special knowledge. It was in being willing to be changed by experience instead of resisting change. Dude, sucking at life is the first step to being sorta good at living. Jake knew that. He lived it. He taught it through example rather than explanation. And maybe that's the most profound thing a magic dog can do. Just exist honestly, kindly, imperfectly, and trust that's enough. Because in Adventure Time's weird world, in our weird world, being enough when you're not perfect might be the hardest and most necessary magic of all. Before Jake was a hero, he was a thief. Not in the cute way where you steal cookies from a jar or borrow your brother's stuff without asking. Real theft, criminal activity, running with a gang, causing chaos across hurting people for fun and profit. Jake had a whole life before Finn, before heroism, before he decided being good was worth the effort. And that past doesn't just disappear because you choose to be better. It stays with you, shapes you, haunts you when you're trying to sleep. The show drops hints early, but reveals the full picture slowly, like peeling back layers of a dog who'd rather you not look too closely at what's underneath all that chill. Tiffany is the first real clue something darker lives in Jake's history. Tiffany appears as a recurring antagonist, this small aggressive guy with a knife who hates Jake with burning obsessive intensity. At first, he seems like random comic relief, another weird citizen with inexplicable grudge. But his hatred is too specific, too personal. He knows Jake. He loved Jake. Not romantically, though the way Tiffany talks about their past friendship has undertones of something deeper, more possessive, more painful than simple camaraderie. They were partners, Best friends who ran together, stole together, caused mayhem together before Jake met Finn and decided to reform. And Jake just left. He found something better, someone better, a purpose that didn't involve hurting people. He transformed himself into a hero and never looked back, never explained, never gave Tiffany closure or apology. He ghosted his entire criminal life, including the people who were part of it. Tiffany represents Jake's guilt made flesh. Every time Tiffany shows up, knife drawn and screaming about betrayal, he's forcing Jake to remember who he used to be. The Jake who stole, the Jake who lied, the Jake who hurt people without caring because caring was weakness and survival meant being harder than the world around you. That Jake still exists somewhere inside the goofy magic dog who makes bacon pancakes for his little brother. He's buried, reformed, reshaped into something gentler, but he's there, and Tiffany won't let him forget it. The criminal past isn't just backstory for dramatic tension, it's essential context for understanding Jake's entire personality. His laid-back attitude isn't natural temperament, it's learned behaviour, conscious choice to be softer than he used to be. His philosophy of going with the flow came from years of fighting against flow and discovering that resistance creates more pain than acceptance. His commitment to being present for Finn stems directly from having abandoned Tiffany and understanding the damage that abandonment causes. Jake reformed because he saw what being hard did to him and others. He chose kindness as rebellion against his own worst instincts. But choosing kindness doesn't erase the capacity for cruelty. It just means you decide not to use it most of the time. All the Little People reveals this darker capacity in disturbing ways. Magic Man gives Jake a bag of tiny people, miniature sentient beings he can control like toys. And Jake immediately starts playing God. He sets up little scenarios, manipulates their relationships, creates drama and suffering because it entertains him. He makes tiny Finn fight tiny Princess Bubblegum. He orchestrates conflicts and watches the miniature people suffer through his manufactured chaos. It's deeply unsettling because Jake isn't being evil in some grand villain way. He's just being thoughtlessly cruel, causing pain because he can, because it's interesting, because the tiny people aren't quite real enough to trigger his empathy. When you have absolute power over beings who can't fight back, Jake's first instinct is to abuse it, not maliciously, casually, which might be worse. The episode ends with Jake horrified by what he's created, the tiny people's world descending into apocalyptic chaos because of his interference. He tries to fix it but can't undo the harm. The tiny people's suffering is permanent, and Jake has to live with having caused it. The episode never resolves cleanly. Jake just has to carry that guilt, that knowledge of what he's capable of when consequences feel distant. That's the darkness under the chill. Jake can be cruel when he forgets to be kind. His goodness requires constant maintenance, conscious choice, active effort. It's not his default setting. His default is probably somewhere closer to the criminal kid who ran with Tiffany, who thought hurting people was funny, who survived through hardness instead of softness. He built something better on that foundation, but foundations don't disappear just because you construct new floors above them. Jake's fears run deeper than his casual demeanour suggests. For someone who seems perpetually relaxed, he's terrified of almost everything that matters. Death, loss, failure, irrelevance, getting old, losing the people he loves, becoming numb to life. The list goes on, and he masks it all with jokes and strategic napping, because acknowledging fear makes it more real. The Creeps showcases this brilliantly. Finn and Jake attend a masquerade party that turns sinister when a ghost starts picking off guests one by one. Jake spends the entire episode terrified, jumping at shadows, convinced he's going to die. His usual confidence evaporates completely. He becomes a trembling mess, barely functional, clinging to Finn for protection. The reveal that it was all an elaborate prank doesn't diminish Jake's terror. His fear was genuine, visceral, the kind that overrides rational thought. For all his talk about accepting death and going with the flow, when faced with actual supernatural threat, Jake falls apart. The philosophy works better in theory than practice. When death feels immediate instead of abstract, all that Buddhist acceptance crumbles into primal panic. Death in Bloom has Jake literally bargaining with death to save Finn's life. Death is an actual entity, and ooh, a skeleton in a suit who adjudicates the boundary between living and dead. When Finn dies temporarily from eating the wrong flower, Jake descends into the land of the dead to negotiate his return. He plays a game with death, offering himself as collateral, willing to trade his own life for Finn's. The episode frames it as heroic sacrifice, and it is. But it's also Jake confronting his deepest fear, his own mortality, and choosing to face it anyway because Finn matters more than his terror. That's not absence of fear. That's courage despite fear, which is the only kind of courage that actually exists. Jake wins the game through cleverness and knowledge of obscure rules. Death respects the victory and returns Finn to life. But Jake is shaken afterward, haunted by having walked through the realm of death, having seen what waits for everyone eventually. The experience doesn't make him less afraid. It makes him more conscious of what fear feels like when it's not theoretical. His relationship with Magic Man represents another form of violation that Jake finds deeply disturbing. Magic Man is a chaos entity who transforms people for his own amusement. He turns Jake inside out once, literally reversing his body so his organs are external and his skin is internal. It's body horror played for comedy, but the violation is real. Jake's body is his tool, his power, the thing he controls completely through stretching. Having that control stripped away, having his physical form altered against his will, terrifies Jake in ways combat never does. You can fight an enemy. You can't fight someone who rewrites your reality as a joke. Magic Man turns Jake into a foot another time. Just transforms him into a human foot complete with toes and heel, taking away his form, his identity, his ability to communicate. Jake exists as a foot for hours, fully conscious but unable to act or speak or be recognized as himself. That's existential horror disguised as absurdist comedy. Jake experiences being an object, being used as someone else's body part, losing personhood while maintaining awareness. These violations shake Jake more than physical danger because they attack his core power, his ability to choose his own shape. When someone else controls your form, you lose agency at the fundamental level. Jake's entire identity is wrapped up in being able to become anything. Taking that away leaves him helpless in ways combat never could. Son of Rat Bear reveals another layer of Jake's insecurity. Jake considers himself a decent musician, a viola player with genuine skill and emotional depth. Then he meets Son of Rat Bear, a rapper so talented that Jake immediately feels inadequate. The episode has Jake competing against Son of Rat Bear, trying to prove he's also an artist worth respecting, spiraling into jealousy and self-doubt. It's not about music. It's about Jake needing to prove he's not just some dog, that he has value beyond being Finn's sidekick and Lady's partner. He needs artistic legitimacy, recognition that he's good at something difficult, validation that he matters in ways beyond utility. When Son of Rat Bear turns out to be genuinely friendly and respectful, Jake has to confront that his insecurity was internal, not caused by external dismissal. Nobody was saying Jake wasn't good enough except Jake himself. The competition existed in his head, projection of fear that he's irrelevant, forgettable, just a magic dog who'll be replaced by someone more talented. That fear lurks constantly underneath Jake's confidence. He knows Finn will outlive him. He knows his kids are growing past needing him. He knows Lady is immortal compared to his dog lifespan. Everyone he loves will eventually move on while Jake ages out of relevance. So he needs to matter now, needs to be exceptional at something, needs legacy beyond just Finn's brother who could stretch. Music gives him that. Art gives him that. Creating something beautiful proves he existed for reasons beyond utility. Dentist might be Jake's darkest episode emotionally, because it addresses his fear of losing sensation, of becoming numb to life. Jake has a cavity. Simple problem. Go to the dentist, get it filled. But Jake is terrified of the dentist, not because of pain, but because of numbness. The anesthetic makes parts of his mouth go dead, removes sensation, creates absence where feeling should exist. For someone whose power and identity are built on heightened bodily awareness, knowing where every inch of his stretched form exists, maintaining consciousness across expanded shapes, numbness is existential threat. If parts of him can go dead, stop feeling, become void, what does that say about his eventual total death? The cavity becomes metaphor for mortality, for the way bodies betray you, for the gradual loss of sensation that aging brings. Jake avoids the dentist through the entire episode, making excuses and deflecting until the pain becomes unbearable. Even then, he only goes because Finn forces him. The actual dental work is fine, painless, over quickly. But Jake's terror was never about the procedure. It was about confronting bodily decline, admitting he's not invulnerable, facing the slow betrayal of aging flesh. His fear of numbness extends beyond physical. Jake is terrified of emotional numbness too, of becoming so jaded or tired that he stops caring about the people and things that matter. He's seen it happen. People growing old and cynical, losing capacity for joy, becoming husks who go through motions without feeling. Jake fights against that constantly by forcing himself to care loudly, love intensely, feel everything deeply even when it hurts. The alternative is becoming numb, and numb is death before death, the worst thing Jake can imagine. The question the show never fully answers: is Jake's darkness inherited from Warren Ampersand? Is the capacity for cruelty, the criminal impulses, the casual ability to hurt people, does that come from alien DNA, from the parasite that bit him and rewrote his biology? Or is it just human nature, the normal capacity for harm that everyone carries, nothing to do with his hybrid status? Jake worries about this sometimes. You can see it in how he reacts to learning about Warren, how he watches Jake Jr.'s criminal behaviour and wonders if he passed something genetic and terrible to his children. Is he fighting against his own nature when he chooses kindness? Is being good exhausting because his biology wants him to be bad? The show suggests no. Jake's darkness isn't special or alien. It's just the normal human capacity for selfishness and cruelty that everyone has. Warren's DNA gave him powers, not personality. The criminal behaviour came from choices Jake made, not from genetics he couldn't control. And the reformation came from different choices, from deciding to be better because someone, Finn, Joshua, Margaret, Lady, made him want to be better. Jake is responsible for his own morality. That's scarier than blaming alien DNA, but it's also more empowering. If his goodness is choice rather than nature, then it's real, earned, maintained through effort. If his darkness is also choice, then he can keep choosing against it. But the effort shows sometimes. Jake gets tired, he snaps at people, he lies when honesty would be harder, he abandons responsibilities when they become overwhelming. The mask of easygoing magic dog slips, and you see the person underneath struggling with the same shit everyone struggles with: fear, inadequacy, exhaustion, the temptation to stop trying. What makes Jake remarkable isn't that he never feels those things. It's that he feels them constantly and keeps choosing kindness anyway. Every day he wakes up and decides to be the person Finn believes he is, the father his kids need, the partner Lady deserves. Some days that choice is easy, other days it's exhausting, but he keeps making it. The hole inside Jake, the melancholy that lives underneath the chill, comes from knowing he's fundamentally broken and choosing to be whole anyway. He's a former criminal carrying guilt, an aging dog watching everyone he loves outlive him, a father who failed some of his kids, a hero who still has capacity for cruelty, a magic dog who's terrified of mortality despite having powers that let him bend reality. He contains all these contradictions and doesn't try to resolve them. He's both broken and whole, both good and capable of harm, both wise and deeply confused, both brave and terrified. The contradictions don't cancel out. They coexist, creating complex person rather than simple archetype. That's what the show gets right about Jake. He's not the wise mentor or the comic relief sidekick. He's a fully realised person who happens to be a magic dog, carrying weight and joy simultaneously, trying his best while knowing his best isn't always enough. The magic of Jake is that he's broken and whole simultaneously. He's done terrible things, feels deep fear, carries guilt that never fully resolves, and he chooses kindness anyway. Not because he's naturally good. He's not. Because goodness is worth choosing even when it's hard, even when your past suggests you don't deserve to be good, even when your fears suggest nothing matters anyway. Jake the dog, alien hybrid and former criminal, proves every day that you can be deeply flawed and still choose to be good. That darkness doesn't disqualify you from light. that being afraid doesn't mean you can't be brave, that having hurt people doesn't mean you can't spend the rest of your life trying to help. The darkness under the chill isn't something to fix or erase. It's part of who he is, context for why his kindness matters, proof that transformation is possible for anyone willing to keep trying despite failing constantly. And maybe that's the most heroic thing about Jake, not his powers or adventures, but his daily choice to be gentler than his past, braver than his fears, better than his worst impulses suggest he could be. The thief became a hero not because he stopped being capable of theft, because he decided every day not to steal, to give instead, to use his powers for helping rather than hurting. That's not magic. That's growth. And growth is the hardest, most necessary magic any of us can do. Jake the dog once threatened to rip Finn's guts out over a card game. Not a game with real stakes. Not life or death. Not saving kingdoms or defeating evil. A tabletop fantasy card game called Card Wars, where you build imaginary landscapes and battle with made-up creatures using paper cards and plastic tokens. Jake became so competitive, so consumed by winning, that he lost every shred of his usual chill and transformed into a terrifying version of himself that valued victory over his brother's feelings. That's the other Jake, the one who exists underneath all the wisdom and kindness. The Jake who needs outlets for intensity, who can't always be relaxed, who has edges sharp enough to cut if you push the right buttons. And Card Wars pushes all of Jake's buttons. The episode Card Wars is secretly about how even the most laid-back person has something they're irrationally passionate about, something that bypasses their emotional regulation and turns them into someone unrecognizable. For Jake, it's this specific tabletop game that he takes more seriously than actual life or death situations. He studies the meta, builds optimal decks, memorizes card interactions, develops strategies that border on obsessive. When Finn wants to learn Card Wars to impress Princess Bubblegum, Jake agrees to teach him. But the teaching quickly transforms into domination. Jake can't help himself. He needs to win, needs to prove he's the best, needs to crush his opponent even when that opponent is his little brother who's just trying to have fun. The competitive drive overrides everything else: loyalty, kindness, perspective. Card Wars. Jake is not chill Jake. Card Wars Jake is intense, calculating, ruthless. Finn wins anyway through beginner's luck and unconventional strategy. Jake's reaction is volcanic. He spirals into rage and disbelief, unable to process losing at the thing he's best at. To someone who just learned the game 5 minutes ago, his ego shatters, his identity as Card Wars champion crumbles, and for a moment, you see how much Jake's self-worth is tied to being exceptional at this one random thing. The episode ends with Jake apologizing, acknowledging he took it too far, admitting Card Wars brings out his worst impulses, but he doesn't stop playing. He just tries to manage his intensity better, recognizing it as part of who he is rather than something to eliminate completely. You can be self-aware about your obsessions without giving them up. You just have to avoid letting them hurt the people you love. Card Wars matters to Jake because it's his thing, not adventuring, which is Finn's passion, not music, which he shares with others. Card Wars is the private obsession that belongs only to him, the space where he can be competitive and strategic and intense, without those qualities conflicting with his role as supportive older brother. Everyone needs an outlet. Jake's happens to involve cardboard landscapes and tiny plastic creatures and rules he's memorized with frightening precision. But music is where Jake's soul actually lives. The viola becomes Jake's primary instrument, though he plays others occasionally. He's genuinely skilled, not just dabbling. When Jake plays viola, the sound is rich, emotional, technically proficient. He practices regularly, takes it seriously in ways he doesn't take most things seriously. Music is how Jake processes feelings he can't or won't verbalize. Sadness, joy, longing, contentment. All of it flows through strings and bow into notes that communicate what words can't. His duet with Marceline in Evicted shows this perfectly. Marceline is a 1,000-year-old vampire queen who's literally seen empires rise and fall, and she respects Jake's musicianship. They jam together naturally, trading melodies and harmonies, speaking through music in ways that transcend the age and power difference between them. Jake holds his own musically with someone who's been playing instruments since before his species existed. That's not casual hobby skill. That's dedicated practice and natural talent combining into genuine artistry. Jake sings constantly throughout the series. Bacon Pancakes becomes iconic. A simple, repetitive song about making bacon pancakes, taking some bacon and putting it in a pancake. The melody is catchy, the lyrics are absurd, and it perfectly captures Jake's approach to life. Why overcomplicate things? Bacon plus pancakes equals happiness. Sing about it. Enjoy the simple pleasure of combining breakfast foods into something better than either alone. But Jake also sings sad songs, contemplative songs, songs about Lady Rainicorn and mortality and the weight of existence. His musical range reflects his emotional range, from goofy to profound, from simple to complex, always authentic to whatever he's feeling in that moment. Music gives Jake permission to feel deeply without having to explain or justify those feelings. The notes do the work. Teaching BMO to be a musician reveals Jake's philosophy about art. BMO wants to learn music but is self-conscious about not being good immediately. Jake tells BMO that sucking at something is the first step toward being sorta good at it, that nobody starts out talented, that practice and enjoyment matter more than immediate mastery. He's patient with BMO's mistakes, encouraging about small improvements, focused on the joy of making music rather than achieving technical perfection. That's Jake as teacher at his best, supportive without being demanding, creating space for learning without imposing expectations. Music should be fun, even when you're taking it seriously. And maybe especially when you're taking it seriously, cooking is another space where Jake's creativity and care shine through. Bacon pancakes become his signature dish, but he makes all kinds of food throughout the series. He's comfortable in the kitchen, experimenting with flavors, combining unlikely ingredients, creating meals that nourish both body and spirit. Cooking is how Jake shows love without saying it directly. Making food for people says I care about you. I want you to feel good. I'm taking time and effort to create something you'll enjoy. The Bacon Pancakes song suggests cooking is also meditation for Jake, a repetitive action that focuses his mind and brings simple satisfaction. The process matters as much as the result. Take some bacon, put it in a pancake, repeat. There's something deeply calming about having a task that's simple, achievable, and produces tangible positive outcome. You start with raw ingredients and end with breakfast. The world makes sense at bacon pancake scale, even when everything else is chaos. Jake's imagination is its own character sometimes, appearing as literal space he can enter. The Imagination Zone episodes show Jake's internal world as colourful, surreal landscape filled with nonsensical creatures and dream logic. His subconscious is a carnival of weird, talking food, flying butts, whatever his brain decides is interesting in that moment. Other characters can visit Jake's imagination zone, experiencing his mental landscape directly, seeing how his mind works when it's not constrained by external reality. What's fascinating is how generous Jake's imagination is. Even in his own head, he creates spaces for others, makes room for different perspectives, allows contradictions to coexist peacefully. His imagination zone isn't rigid or controlling. It flows, changes, adapts to whoever's visiting. That's Jake's mental flexibility made literal, his consciousness bending to accommodate others even in his most private internal spaces. His prophetic dreams suggest Jake's imagination connects to something deeper than normal dreaming. The cosmic owl appears in his dreams with actual prophecies that come true. Jake experiences visions of his death, glimpses of alternate timelines, warnings about future dangers. His brain is porous to cosmic information in ways most people's aren't. Maybe it's the alien DNA. Maybe it's Jake's natural openness to weirdness. Maybe imagination and prophecy aren't that different when reality's already flexible. Either way, Jake's internal world is rich enough to require its own geography, its own rules, its own ecosystem of weird creatures and surreal scenarios. Most people's imaginations are background noise. Jake's is a place you can visit, explore, get lost in. That's not normal. That's Jake's brain refusing to operate within conventional boundaries. His relationship with his body is uniquely non-attached despite spending so much time thinking about what shape to take. Jake rarely wears clothes, comfortable being naked in ways that suggest complete acceptance of his physical form. He's a dog, technically, so nudity is natural, but he's also a person-level consciousness, aware enough to understand social conventions about covering yourself. He just doesn't care. His body's fine as it is. Why hide it? When Jake does wear clothes, it's for specific practical reasons or because the situation demands formality. He puts on a tuxedo for fancy events. He wears disguises for stealth missions. But he never seems self-conscious about appearance, never worries about how he looks to others. Physical insecurity doesn't exist when you can literally reshape yourself into anything. If Jake wanted to look different, he'd just become different. The fact that he stays dog-shaped suggests he's happy with that form, but he has strong opinions about others' nudity, understanding boundaries and appropriate context, even though he personally doesn't need clothes. When characters are uncomfortable being naked, Jake respects that, finding them something to wear or averting his eyes. His comfort with his own body doesn't mean he expects everyone else to share that comfort. Boundaries matter. Consent matters. Just because Jake doesn't care about his own nudity doesn't mean he's entitled to see others naked or make them uncomfortable. That's emotional intelligence showing up in unexpected places. Jake's body positivity is genuine but not imposed on others. He models comfort with himself without demanding others feel the same way. His contradictions define him more than any single trait. Lazy but heroic, afraid but brave, simple but profound, selfish but generous, chill but intense. These aren't problems to solve or inconsistencies to fix. They're human complexity, or dog complexity, or alien-dog hybrid complexity. Jake contains multitudes because he doesn't try to be consistent. He tries to be present, and present looks different depending on context. When Finn needs support, Jake is patient and wise. When Card Wars demands victory, Jake is competitive and ruthless. When Lady needs romance, Jake is attentive and tender. When his kids need freedom, Jake is hands-off and trusting. When his kids need discipline, Jake struggles because structure feels constraining. He adapts to situations, but not perfectly, not seamlessly. The contradictions show through constantly. But that's what makes him real instead of archetype. Real people aren't consistent. They're collections of conflicting impulses and values that fight for dominance depending on circumstances. Jake doesn't pretend otherwise. He's whoever the moment needs him to be, whoever he's capable of being with the energy and wisdom available right then. Some days he's the wise mentor. Other days he's the selfish friend. Most days he's both somehow, and that's fine. The surreal moments that define Jake's personality are endless. Teaching BMO about being a tough tootin' baby as life advice. Explaining Lady Rainicorn's feelings through increasingly abstract metaphors involving colours Jake can't actually see because he's a dog. Believing the floor is lava game is legitimate combat training, having serious philosophical discussions with his own belly button about cosmic owls and prophetic dreams. These moments aren't random, they're Jake's worldview expressing itself. The belief that reality is flexible, that meaning is subjective, that taking yourself too seriously is missing the point. If your belly button has opinions about prophecy, why not listen? If playing pretend teaches real skills, why distinguish between game and training? If the floor might actually be lava in a world where magic exists, why not treat it seriously? Jake lives in the liminal space between joke and sincerity, never fully committing to either. He's serious about unserious things and unserious about serious things, refusing to accept that there's objective difference between what matters and what doesn't. Everything matters if you decide it does. Nothing matters if you decide it doesn't. Jake chooses moment by moment, context by context, what deserves his full attention and what deserves his bemused detachment. His obsession with Lady's infrared vision is particularly telling. Jake is fascinated by the fact that Lady sees different wavelengths than him, that her perception of reality is fundamentally different from his. He asks about it constantly, trying to understand how the world looks through her eyes, acknowledging that his experience isn't universal or complete. That's intellectual humility disguised as dog-talking to his rainbow unicorn girlfriend about colours he'll never see. Most people assume their perception is reality. Jake knows his perception is just one version, that Lady experiences different truth, that both are valid even when they contradict. That's why their relationship works despite the language barrier and species difference. They accept that understanding someone doesn't mean experiencing what they experience. It means respecting that their experience is real, even when you can't directly access it. The little joys that sustain Jake are genuinely small. Bacon pancakes, naps in sunlight, playing viola badly and then better, making Finn laugh, flying through clouds on Lady's back, watching his pups grow. Card Wars victories, sandwiches, the specific satisfaction of stretching really far and then snapping back into dog shape. BMO's weird observations about life. These aren't grand, meaningful experiences. They're tiny moments of pleasure that accumulate into a life worth living. Jake understands that happiness isn't one big achievement. It's 1,000 small good things strung together with intentionality and attention. You can't control whether you become a legendary hero. You can control whether you notice how good bacon pancakes taste when you make them just right. That's the secret to Jake's contentment despite all his fears and failures. He's learned to find joy in the immediate and available rather than postponing happiness until he achieves something huge. The adventure is happening now. The love is present now. The bacon pancakes exist now. Why wait for some future perfected version of life when this version has sandwiches and music and people who care about you? His approach to style is anti-style. Jake doesn't curate an aesthetic or worry about looking cool. He's a yellow dog who stretches. That's the whole look. Sometimes he wears pants for formal occasions, always looks slightly uncomfortable in them, takes them off as soon as socially acceptable. His style is comfort, authenticity, not pretending to be something he isn't. But he respects others' style choices, never mocking people for caring about appearance even though he doesn't. When Finn experiments with different looks, Jake is supportive. When Princess Bubblegum maintains her royal aesthetic, Jake doesn't question it. People express themselves through appearance, and that's valid even if Jake personally finds it exhausting. That's another contradiction. Jake doesn't care about style, but respects those who do. He's comfortable enough in his own lack of aesthetic to not feel threatened by others' investment in theirs. The things that make Jake Jake aren't his powers or heroism. They're the obsessions, hobbies, weird passions that give him texture beyond magic dog sidekick. He's a person with interests, and those interests are deeply specific. Card Wars competitive intensity, viola emotional expression, bacon pancakes meditative cooking, imagination zone surreal consciousness, relationship with his body, contradictions he doesn't try to resolve. Strip away the magic, the adventures, the narrative purpose, and you're left with someone who has Card Wars opinions, who plays music when feelings get too big for words, who makes breakfast and calls it achievement. That's Jake. Not the stretching, not the heroism. The small, specific, weird human things he cares about for no grand reason, except they bring him joy or purpose or distraction from existential dread. Maybe the secret to Jake's happiness isn't that he has no problems. He's got plenty, we've established that. It's that he always has bacon pancakes, or Card Wars, or Viola, or Lady, or Finn. Or some small concrete thing that grounds him when everything else feels overwhelming and meaningless. You can't solve mortality through bacon pancakes, but you can eat them while you're alive, enjoy them fully, share them with people you love, and maybe that's enough. Maybe the meaning isn't in living forever or achieving greatness. Maybe it's in the accumulation of small pleasures taken seriously, in finding significance in things others dismiss as trivial. Jake the Magic Dog, alien hybrid and former criminal, proves every day that life doesn't need grand purpose to be worth living. It needs bacon pancakes, music, games that make you irrationally competitive, people you love, and willingness to find joy in the weird specific things that speak to your weird specific soul. The infinite shapes Jake can take matter less than the shape of his daily life, what he chooses to care about, what brings him satisfaction, what makes him laugh. That's the real magic. Not stretching across kingdoms, but finding reasons to keep showing up for another day of breakfast and music and love. Because at the end of every adventure, after all the heroism and philosophy and growth, Jake taught us that the real treasure is taking some bacon and putting it in a pancake. And honestly, he's right. That's not profound or revolutionary, it's just true. Sometimes the answer to life's complexity is simple pleasure, done with full attention and shared with people you love. Maybe the ultimate Jake wisdom is this. Make the bacon pancakes. Play the card game too seriously. Learn the instrument. Love the people. Nap in sunbeams. And stop worrying about whether any of it matters cosmically, because it matters to you, and that's sufficient. Take some bacon and you put it in a pancake. That's the philosophy. That's the practice. That's Jake. Jake the dog dies off screen, and that's somehow worse. We don't see it happen. No dramatic final battle. No heroic sacrifice. No tearful deathbed goodbye with everyone gathered around. The show ends with Jake alive, aging but present, still stretching and making jokes and being there for Finn. Then years pass in the space between the series finale and the Together Again special, and when we return to Ooh, Jake is already gone, already buried, already memory instead of presence. Finn is old now, not elderly, but middle-aged, greying, carrying decades of life in his posture and eyes. He's been adventuring alone for longer than he adventured with Jake. He's had a whole second act of heroism without his brother, saving people and fighting evil and being the hero he always wanted to be. But something essential is missing. The joy is gone. The wonder is gone. Finn goes through the motions of heroism like someone performing a duty they no longer believe in, because the person who made it fun isn't there to share it. Jake died. That's the starting point of Together Again, the epilogue that Adventure Time didn't need to make but did anyway because some stories demand completion. Jake died naturally, peacefully, surrounded by love. He lived a full dog life, longer than most dogs, shorter than most humans. The Cosmic Owl's prophecy came true eventually, or maybe it didn't. Or maybe prophecy doesn't matter when you've lived well enough that death becomes acceptable ending rather than tragedy. Lady Rainicorn was there. The pups were there. Finn was there, holding his brother's paw as Jake's breathing slowed and stopped, and the magic dog who could become anything became finally, permanently still. No more stretching. No more bacon pancakes. No more Card Wars victories or viola songs or philosophical observations about sandwiches. Just Jake's body, empty of the consciousness that made it matter, waiting to be buried under a tree where sunlight would warm the earth above him. Finn buried his brother and kept living because that's what Jake would have wanted. But living without Jake means Finn has been walking around with a hole in his chest shaped like a magic dog for decades. He fills it with more adventures, more heroism, more desperate attempts to recapture what they had. He takes on new partners, meets new people, saves new kingdoms. None of it works. None of them are Jake. You can't replace your brother. You can only learn to carry the weight of his absence. The special opens with Finn dying too, which is how we learn Jake has been dead for years. Finn sacrifices himself saving someone, because of course he does. Because Jake taught him that heroism means giving yourself for others. And suddenly, Finn is in the afterlife, confused and disoriented, not quite believing he's actually dead. Death in Adventure Time is complicated. There are multiple dead worlds, different afterlife realms for different kinds of souls, a whole bureaucracy of death that includes literal death as an entity, plus various psychopomps and guides and administrators. Finn finds himself in the 50th dead world initially, a bland waiting area filled with souls being processed for whatever comes next. And Finn's first thought is, where's Jake? Because if death is real, if there's an afterlife, then Jake is somewhere in this system. Jake died first. He's been here for years, decades maybe, doing whatever dead dogs do in whatever realm dead dogs go to. Finn needs to find him, needs to see him again, needs to confirm that death isn't the end of their bond, that being brothers transcends the boundary between living and dead. So Finn goes looking. He navigates the bureaucracy of death, talks to psychopomps, argues with administrators, refuses to move on to his designated afterlife until he finds Jake. It's quintessential Finn behaviour. Rules don't matter. Proper procedure doesn't matter. Cosmic order doesn't matter. Finding his brother matters. Everything else is secondary. The search takes him through multiple dead worlds, each one stranger than the last. Adventure Time's afterlife is characteristically weird. Souls playing mini-golf, bureaucrats filing paperwork for eternity, various candy people and citizens of Ooh who died before Finn, all existing in these liminal spaces between life and whatever comes after. And finally, in the 37th dead world, Finn finds him, Jake the dog, looking exactly like he did in his prime, yellow fur and goofy smile and that specific energy that made him Jake. He's been waiting. Not passively, not stuck. Jake has been actively choosing to stay in this particular dead world, reincarnating repeatedly but always coming back to the same place, the same realm, waiting for Finn to die and find him. Jake waited decades for his brother, lived full lifetimes in the space between his death and Finn's, experiencing other lives as other beings, then always choosing to return to the 37th dead world because that's where they agreed to meet. They never actually agreed, not explicitly, but Jake knew. He knew Finn would come looking. He knew their bond didn't end with his body. So he waited. The reunion is everything. Finn sees Jake and everything he's been carrying, the grief, the loneliness, the decades of adventuring without his brother. All of it crashes into him simultaneously. He's crying and laughing and hugging Jake's stretchy body, and Jake is there. Real, present, making jokes about death being pretty chill actually, offering to show Finn around the afterlife like it's just another adventure. Because to Jake it is another adventure. Death isn't ending, it's transition, transformation, another shape to take. He's been exploring the dead worlds, meeting other souls, playing card games with people who've been dead for centuries, making bacon pancakes from memory or imagination or whatever dead people make food from. He's been living, just in different format, waiting for the moment when Finn would join him and they could continue together. They talk, they process, they sit together in the 37th dead world, and Finn explains what happened after Jake died. The loneliness, the desperate attempts to fill the void, the way heroism felt hollow without someone to share it with. And Jake listens with that specific Jake patience, the kind that doesn't judge or try to fix, just holds space for pain to exist and be acknowledged. Jake tells Finn about dying, how it wasn't scary at the end, how his body just got tired and stopped, how he was ready because he'd lived so fully that death felt like earned rest, how Lady held him and the pup surrounded him, and Finn's hand was warm in his paw, and the last thing he felt was love, which is the best possible last thing to feel. How he woke up in the afterlife confused for maybe 5 minutes before deciding it was fine. Death is fine. Everything continues in different form. He tells Finn he's been reincarnating, living as different beings, experiencing other perspectives. He's been a butterfly, a comet, a small shrub, various other entities. Each life is short, complete. Then he comes back to the 37th dead world to wait for Finn. He's not trapped or suffering. He's just committed to their bond in ways that transcend mortality. Brothers forever means forever, even when forever requires dying and waiting and dying again. The special explores the afterlife's bureaucracy with Adventure Time's signature weirdness. There's a soul-sorting system. There are rules about which dead world you're assigned to based on your life's accumulated meaning or karma, or whatever metric the cosmic administrators use. There are options for reincarnation, for moving to higher or lower realms, for choosing what comes next. And Jake and Finn are offered a choice. Move on to their designated afterlives separately, pursuing individual soul development, or reincarnate together, over and over, forever. Be brothers in every lifetime, find each other repeatedly, maintain their bond across infinite incarnations. It's against the rules, bending the system, requiring special permission from higher cosmic authorities. But the option exists because their bond is strong enough to warrant exception. They choose together. Of course they do. Finn doesn't hesitate. Jake doesn't need to think about it. They've been brothers for one lifetime, and that was good enough to earn infinite lifetimes more. They'll reincarnate together, find each other as different beings, maintain connection across whatever forms they take. Human and dog, then maybe two birds, then maybe butterflies, then maybe cosmic entities, then maybe back to simple creatures. The forms don't matter. The bond matters. That's the show's ultimate statement about what matters. Connection transcends form. Love outlasts bodies. The relationships you build are the only things that carry forward when everything else ends. Finn and Jake proved this in life by being brothers across species difference. They prove it in death by choosing to be brothers across infinite incarnations. Before they reincarnate, they have one last adventure together. Because Adventure Time can't let them just talk. It needs them to do something, face something. prove their bond through action rather than just declaration. They confront New Death, the entity currently running the death system, who doesn't want to allow their exception. They fight through obstacles, solve puzzles, use their combined skills, Finn's courage and Jake's flexibility, both literal and metaphorical, to earn the right to stay together. And they win, because they're Finn and Jake, and they've always won when it mattered most. New Death grants them permission to reincarnate together, acknowledging that some bonds are strong enough to bend cosmic rules. The system exists to serve souls, not control them. If these two want to be brothers forever, the universe can accommodate that. The final scene has them preparing to reincarnate, standing at the edge of some cosmic precipice, ready to jump into their next life. They're holding hands, Finn's human hand and Jake's paw, the same way they've held hands through every adventure, every danger, every moment that required them to trust each other completely. And they jump together, laughing, because even death is an adventure when you face it with your brother. The screen fades to white, and we see them reincarnate as something new, something we don't fully see, something that doesn't matter because the point isn't what they become. The point is that they become it together. That's the ending. Adventure Time gives Jake the dog, not tragic death, but eternal continuation. Not separation, but infinite reunion. Not loss, but transformation into different forms of the same essential bond. The emotional weight for viewers is massive because we watched Jake for 10 seasons, 283 episodes, saw him be goofy and wise and scared and brave and everything in between. We watched him raise Finn, love Lady, father his pups, struggle with his past, face his fears, choose kindness repeatedly. We grew up with him the same way Finn did, learning from his mistakes and wisdom, laughing at his jokes, crying at his pain. And then he died. Off-screen, unceremoniously, the way most people die. Not heroically, just naturally because bodies stop working and time runs out. That's not narratively satisfying in traditional sense. But it's honest. Jake didn't get a hero's death because Jake's heroism was never about dramatic sacrifice. It was about showing up daily, loving consistently, trying imperfectly. That kind of heroism ends with ordinary death surrounded by love, having lived well enough that death becomes acceptable. Viewers mourned Jake before Together Again confirmed his death. The series finale implied it through Finn's age, through Jake's absence in certain flash-forwards, through the melancholy that permeated the ending. We knew Jake died before we saw it confirmed. We'd been processing the loss for years between the finale and the special. Together Again gave us closure we didn't know we needed. It confirmed Jake died well, lived fully, loved completely. It showed us Finn survived Jake's death, even though it broke something in him. It proved their bond transcended mortality, that choosing to be brothers once earned them infinite chances to be brothers again. It's not tragic. Tragedy implies waste, loss of potential, something cut short unfairly. Jake lived a full life. He experienced everything he wanted to experience. Adventure, love, fatherhood, music, friendship, bacon pancakes. He got decades with Finn, years with Lady, time with his pups. He reformed from criminal to hero, learned wisdom through failure, chose kindness over cruelty repeatedly. His life was complete. Death isn't tragic when life was full. It's just the natural end, the necessary punctuation that gives meaning to everything that came before. Jake's death matters because Jake's life mattered. Without death, without scarcity, without time running out, his choices would have carried less weight. The fact that he died makes the way he lived more significant. And Jake taught Finn how to live through example. Be present, love fully, admit when you're wrong, keep trying despite failure, find joy in simple things, stretch yourself for others. In death, Jake teaches Finn how to let go, how to accept that endings are necessary, how to honour someone by living well after they're gone rather than collapsing into grief. Finn spent decades processing Jake's loss before dying himself. That processing was its own adventure, its own growth, its own heroism. Learning to live without Jake while keeping Jake's lessons alive, becoming the master of his own story instead of the apprentice in Jake's, carrying the weight of absence while still finding reasons to keep going. That's the harder heroism. Fighting the Lich is simpler than waking up every day for 40 years without your brother and choosing to keep being a hero anyway. Saving Candy Kingdoms is easier than processing grief while maintaining connection to joy. Finn did that. He lived well enough post-Jake that when death came, he'd earned his rest and reunion. The show never lied about mortality. From early episodes, Jake's shorter lifespan was implied through dog years, through his aging faster than Finn, through prophetic dreams about death. Adventure Time never pretended Jake would live forever. It just let us hope maybe cartoon logic would spare him, maybe magic would extend his life, maybe he'd find a way to cheat death permanently. He didn't. He died, like everyone dies. And the show honoured that honestly instead of manufacturing fake-out resurrection or magical solution. Death is real, even in cartoon worlds, especially in cartoon worlds that take emotional honesty seriously. But death isn't the end of Jake's story. His legacy lives through Finn, through his pups, through everyone he taught or helped or loved. His wisdom becomes part of how people approach problems. His kindness becomes model for how to treat others. His music lives in the songs people remember. His philosophy, sucking at something is the first step to being sorta good at something, will outlast his body by generations. That's immortality. Not living forever, but leaving impact that continues after you're gone. Jake achieved that without trying, just by being authentically himself, imperfectly kind, consistently present for the people he loved. The 37th Dead World becomes significant because Jake chose it. He could have moved on, pursued higher realms, experienced eternal bliss or whatever awaits souls who've lived well. Instead, he stayed in the middle realm, the waiting place, because Finn mattered more than personal spiritual advancement. He chose connection over enlightenment, brother over progression. That's love as action, not feeling. Jake felt ready to move on, probably, but he acted on commitment instead, staying put until Finn arrived, honouring their bond through patient waiting. Decades of reincarnating and returning over and over, maintaining his post in the 37th Dead World because he promised, implicitly, through their entire relationship, that death wouldn't separate them. And it didn't. Death was just intermission, pause between acts, temporary separation before eternal reunion. The brothers who chose each other in life chose each other in death, and the universe respected that choice enough to make exception. Jake the Magic Dog died naturally, peacefully, loved. He waited for his brother across the boundary between life and death. He chose infinite future incarnations together over individual spiritual progression. He proved that love transcends mortality, that bonds built with care and maintained through effort outlast the bodies that formed them. That's not sad. That's beautiful. That's the best possible ending for a character who spent his life teaching people that the meaning isn't in living forever. It's in deciding that right now, with the people you love, is enough. Jake lived right now for his entire life. Every adventure, every bacon pancake, every moment with Finn or Lady or his kids, he was present for all of it, fully engaged, completely there. And when death came, he faced it the same way. Present, engaged, ready for the next adventure. The real magic of Jake isn't that he could become anything. It's that he became exactly who he chose to be. Brother, father, partner, friend, teacher, student, hero, flawed person trying his best. He lived imperfectly well enough that death became acceptable ending rather than tragedy. And then he waited. And then Finn came. And then they jumped together into infinite continuation, proving that the real adventure was never about saving kingdoms or defeating evil. It was about finding someone who makes you want to show up, keep trying, stretch yourself beyond what you thought possible. Jake found that in Finn. Finn found that in Jake. And death couldn't take it away because love, real love, doesn't end when bodies do. It transforms, continues, finds new shapes to inhabit. Two brothers who became brothers by choice, across species, across mortality, across infinite incarnations. That's the story. That's the ending. Jake the dog died, and then he lived again, and again, forever, with Finn. Because some adventures never end. They just change shape, and Jake was always really good at changing shape while staying fundamentally himself. The final lesson: death is just another shape to take, another transition to navigate, another adventure to face together. And if you've lived well enough, loved fully enough, been present consistently enough, then death isn't scary. It's just the thing that happens next, before the reunion, before the continuation, before infinity together. Jake taught Finn how to live. In death, he taught him something harder: how to let go while holding on, how to accept ending while trusting continuation, how to mourn loss while celebrating what was. And Finn learned. He lived decades alone, mourning well, carrying Jake's lessons forward. Then he died. Then he found Jake waiting. Then they chose forever together. That's not tragedy. That's triumph. That's two brothers proving that when you build something real, death is just pause button, not ending. Adventure Time never lied. It told us from the beginning that Jake would die first, that Finn would grieve, that separation was inevitable. It just also promised that separation isn't forever, that bonds strong enough bend reality, that choosing someone once can earn you infinite chances to choose them again. Jake the magic dog lived well, died peacefully, waited patiently, and got his brother back. Forever. That's the ending he earned. That's the ending he deserved. That's the ending that honours everything he was: imperfect, loving, afraid, brave, present until the end and beyond it. The dog who could become anything became eternal through love, not through power or heroism or magic, but through choosing connection over everything else, repeatedly, until the universe respected that choice enough to make it permanent. And somewhere, across infinite incarnations, Finn and Jake are still adventuring together. Different forms, same bond, forever brothers, because they decided once that brotherhood mattered more than anything else. That's the magic. That's the meaning. That's Jake. Here's what Jake the dog taught a generation. You don't have to be perfect to be good. That sentence saved lives. Not metaphorically, actually saved them. People who grew up watching Adventure Time talk about Jake in therapy sessions, cite him in college essays, reference his wisdom when they're struggling with depression or anxiety, or the crushing weight of trying to be enough in a world that demands everything. A cartoon dog who stretched and made bacon pancakes became philosophical foundation for how millions of people approach existence. That's not normal. That's cultural impact that transcends entertainment. Gen Z and millennials grew up during interesting times, which is the polite way of saying we inherited a burning world and were told to fix it while also being perfect, successful, mentally healthy, politically engaged, financially stable, and authentically ourselves. The demands were impossible. The expectations were crushing. And into that pressure cooker of generational anxiety came Jake the dog saying, "Dude, sucking at something is the first step to being sorta good at something. Permission to be bad at stuff. Permission to fail. Permission to try anyway, despite knowing you'll probably mess up." That 3-second piece of dialogue from a magic dog contradicted everything society was teaching us about perfectionism and productivity, and never showing weakness. Jake became counterculture through radical acceptance. Adventure Time aired from 2010 to 2018, spanning the exact years when millennials were entering adulthood and Gen Z was forming their worldview. We watched the show as kids, teenagers, college students, young adults trying to figure out how to exist in a world that felt increasingly apocalyptic. The show was literally set in a post-apocalyptic wasteland which felt appropriate. The Mushroom War destroyed civilization. Our generation inherited climate change, economic collapse, endless wars, social media toxicity, and the death of the future our parents promised us. Jake existed in that destroyed world and chose joy anyway. He made bacon pancakes in the ruins of human civilization. He adventured through candy kingdoms built on nuclear fallout. He loved and laughed and napped in sunbeams while the world's underlying horror lurked in every episode's background. That wasn't denial. That was survival strategy, finding reasons to keep living when external circumstances suggest giving up. We needed that model. We still need it. Compare Jake to other animated mentors and the differences become clear. Uncle Iroh from Avatar. The Last Airbender offers wisdom through detachment, spiritual enlightenment earned through suffering. He's profound, gentle, wise beyond measure. But Iroh has achieved something most people never will: peace with himself, acceptance of his past, spiritual development that requires decades of dedicated work. He's aspirational, but distant. You can't be Iroh. You can only hope to learn from him. Bender from Futurama represents the opposite extreme: pure chaos, selfishness without growth, nihilism dressed as humour. Bender is entertaining but toxic, teaching all the wrong lessons about how to treat people. He's cathartic but not helpful. You watch Bender to laugh at someone being terrible, not to learn how to live. Jake splits the difference. He's not Iroh's achieved enlightenment or Bender's weaponized dysfunction. He's specifically Jake, flawed, trying, succeeding sometimes and failing others, deeply loving while occasionally selfish, wise about some things and clueless about others. You can be Jake. You already are Jake, probably. Imperfect person trying your best with mixed results, hoping love compensates for all the ways you fall short. That accessibility makes Jake revolutionary. He doesn't demand you become enlightened or accept that you're garbage. He models the middle path. Try to be good, admit when you mess up, keep trying anyway. It's not glamorous. It's not particularly dramatic. It's just a sustainable way to exist as flawed person in complicated world. His cultural impact manifests in specific ways. Sucking at something is the first step to being sorta good at something became genuine motivational mantra. Teachers use it in classrooms to combat perfectionism. Therapists reference it when clients struggle with fear of failure. Artists quote it when learning new skills. The phrase has transcended its source material to become free-floating wisdom that people apply to everything from learning instruments to navigating relationships to surviving capitalism. Bacon pancakes is still a meme 15 years later. People make the actual food, sing the song, reference it as shorthand for simple pleasures taken seriously. It represents Jake's entire philosophy. Combine things you like, enjoy the result, don't overthink it. Bacon plus pancakes equals happiness. The meaning isn't hidden or complex. It's right there on the surface, accessible to anyone who decides that simple joy is worth pursuing. Jake's relaxed masculinity offered alternative to toxic stereotypes that dominated media when Adventure Time aired. He cries openly, expresses fear without shame, admits when he doesn't know things, asks for help, prioritizes emotional connection over dominance. He's physically capable but doesn't define himself through violence. He can fight but would rather not. He's a hero who succeeds through flexibility rather than force, adaptation rather than aggression. That model mattered for young boys learning what manhood could look like. Jake showed them you can be strong and vulnerable, capable and afraid, confident and uncertain. Masculinity doesn't require constant performance of toughness. It can include music, cooking, emotional openness, willingness to be wrong. Jake never questions his masculinity despite exhibiting traits traditional society codes as feminine. He just exists as himself, comfortable with contradiction, proving that rigid gender expectations are unnecessary constraints. For young girls, Jake modelled what supportive men could be: partners who learn your language, fathers who show up imperfectly, brothers who make space for your growth. Lady Rainicorn never has to minimise herself for Jake's ego. He celebrates her fully, learns Korean to communicate better, respects her autonomy. That's partnership based on mutual respect rather than dominance. Seeing that modelled in children's programming planted seeds for healthier relationship expectations. The thematic resonance goes deeper than individual quotes or moments. Jake represents Adventure Time's core message about growing up after the world ended. The show is fundamentally about post-apocalyptic childhood, about building meaning in ruins, about choosing connection when everything external suggests isolation. That's not just the show's literal setting, it's metaphor for generational experience. Millennials and Gen Z inherited a world destroyed by previous generations, ecologically, economically, socially. We came of age watching institutions fail, promises break, futures evaporate. The apocalypse isn't coming. We're living in its aftermath, trying to build something good from wreckage we didn't create. That's the mushroom war. That's climate change and economic inequality and everything else. We're Finn and Jake, picking through ruins, making the best of what remains. Jake chose joy in that context. Not toxic positivity that denies pain, but genuine decision to find pleasure where possible, love who you can, make bacon pancakes because they taste good and that's sufficient reason. When external meaning is unavailable, you create your own through small, deliberate actions. That's not privileged ignorance of suffering. That's survival strategy that acknowledges suffering while refusing to let it define everything. In a post-apocalyptic world, Jake chose to be kind. That's the political act. When the world demands hardness, choosing softness is rebellion. When society says produce or die, choosing to nap is resistance. When culture says optimize yourself constantly, choosing to suck at things without shame is revolutionary. Jake didn't preach this. He lived it. That's why it worked. The show never stopped to explain Jake's philosophy explicitly. It just showed him being himself, goofy, wise, scared, brave, all of it simultaneously, and trusted viewers to extract meaning through observation. That respect for audience intelligence is rare in children's media. Adventure Time didn't talk down to kids. It presented complex ideas through character action and let people figure it out. For the target audience now, older than Finn was, younger than Jake, we understand both perspectives. We remember being 12, desperate to matter, needing purpose and identity. We also know being 28, 35, 40, past youthful certainty, carrying accumulated failures, questioning whether we're doing enough or being enough. Jake speaks to that specific age, that specific confusion about whether you've figured things out or just gotten better at pretending. The answer Jake offers: nobody figures it out. You just get better at being comfortable with not knowing. You develop strategies for coping with uncertainty. You find people who make uncertainty bearable. You build small, meaningful routines that give structure when everything else feels chaotic. You keep trying despite constant failure, because the alternative is giving up, and giving up means letting the world's cruelty win. Jake never let it win. He faced fear, mortality, failure, his own darkness. He encountered everything that could break a person, and chose to stay whole through connection, through bacon pancakes, through music and love and showing up for people who needed him. That's not weakness. That's strength that looks different from traditional depictions. Flexible instead of rigid, soft instead of hard, adaptive instead of dominant. Adventure Time's ending felt appropriate because it didn't resolve everything neatly. Ooh continues, weird and broken and beautiful. Characters keep living, struggling, growing. The show ended, but the world kept going, which mirrors reality. Life doesn't climax and resolve. It continues until it doesn't, and then others carry forward what you built. Jake's legacy within the show is his kids, his relationship with Finn, his influence on everyone he encountered. He changed people not through grand gestures, but through consistent presence, through being available when needed, through modelling that imperfection doesn't disqualify you from being good. His legacy outside the show is everyone who learned from him, who quotes him, who approaches life differently because a cartoon dog suggested that maybe sucking at stuff is okay, that maybe simple pleasures are sufficient, that maybe being yourself, flawed, confused, trying, is the only real option anyway, since perfection is impossible and pretending otherwise creates suffering. The show concluded, but Jake's philosophy remains relevant because the problems that made him necessary haven't disappeared. Gen Z and millennials are still navigating post-apocalyptic landscape, still trying to build meaning from ruins, still crushing under pressure to be perfect while system burns. We still need permission to be imperfect, to fail, to keep trying anyway. Jake gives that permission. Not through authority or expertise, but through example. He was imperfect and good simultaneously. He failed constantly and remained lovable. He was broken and whole, scared and brave, simple and profound. All the contradictions that make humans messy existed in Jake without apology or attempt to resolve them. He just was, fully, without pretending otherwise. That's the gift he gave viewers. Permission to exist as you are, contradictions and all, without needing to fix everything before you're allowed to be loved or matter or find joy. You can be a mess and still make good bacon pancakes. You can be scared and still be brave. You can be flawed and still be someone worth knowing. For viewers now, past the age when cartoons were primary entertainment, Jake remains reference point for how to exist. When perfectionism spirals, remember Jake sucking at card wars and learning gradually. When afraid, remember Jake facing death through prophetic dreams and choosing to live fully anyway. When feeling inadequate, remember Jake being terrible father sometimes and still being loved by his kids. When everything feels meaningless, remember bacon pancakes exist and that's something. The wisdom Jake offered isn't complex or hidden. It's accessible, practical, immediately applicable. Be present. Admit when you're wrong. Love the people around you. Find simple pleasures and take them seriously. Stretch yourself for others when you can. Rest when you need to. Accept that you'll die eventually and use that knowledge to live better now. Keep showing up despite constant failure, because showing up is the only thing you actually control. That's not profound in academic sense. It's profound in practical sense. Wisdom you can use immediately today, without needing years of spiritual development or therapy or perfect circumstances. Jake's philosophy works wherever you are, however broken, however far from okay. You don't need to be fixed to start implementing it. You just need to decide that trying is worthwhile even when outcome is uncertain. Jake made that decision daily. Every morning he woke up and chose to be present, to be kind when possible, to stretch himself for others, to find joy in available pleasures. Some days were easier than others. Some days he failed completely. But he kept choosing, kept trying, kept being Jake, despite all the ways Jake fell short of ideal. That persistence is heroic. Not dramatic one-time sacrifice, but quiet daily choice to keep being person you want to be even when it's exhausting. Jake modelled sustainable heroism, the kind that doesn't burn out because it includes rest, admits limitations, accepts imperfection as baseline rather than failure. The final message Jake leaves is about legacy and continuation. He died, but his influence persists through everyone he touched. His kids carry his lessons, imperfectly applying them to their own lives. Finn carries his wisdom, using it to navigate decades without his brother. Lady carries their love, proving that connection transcends death. Viewers carry his philosophy, applying it to problems Jake never faced in contexts that didn't exist when the show aired. That's immortality, not living forever but creating impact that outlasts your body. Jake achieved that without trying, just by being authentically himself, imperfectly kind, consistently present. The legacy isn't intentional, it's byproduct of living honestly, treating people well when possible, admitting failure without letting it stop you. What shape would you stretch into if you could be anything? Jake asked this implicitly through every transformation, every choice about how to use his power. And the answer revealed character. He chose helpful shapes, generous shapes, shapes that served others rather than himself. When you can be anything, what you choose to become reveals what you value. Jake valued connection, so he became bridges, keys, shelters, vehicles, shapes that let others reach their destinations, access what they needed, stay safe. He could have become weapons constantly, turned himself into instruments of destruction, used his power dominantly. Instead, he became infrastructure, support, the foundation others built on. That's the legacy worth inheriting. Not power for its own sake, but power used generously. Not ability for dominance, but ability for service. Not being exceptional, but using whatever you have, exceptional or mundane, to make things slightly better for people you encounter. Would you choose bacon pancakes or spaghetti? Jake would say both are good. Depends on context, don't overthink it. The question isn't which food is objectively better. It's what brings you joy in this moment, what nourishes you specifically, what simple pleasure you can access right now. Bacon pancakes when you need comfort, spaghetti when you want something different. Neither when you're not hungry. The answer changes based on circumstances, and that's fine. Flexibility is strength, not weakness. When your own new frontier comes, when you face the thing you've been dreading, the inevitable ending, the loss you can't prevent, who would you wait for? Jake waited for Finn across death's boundary, proving love transcends mortality. That's the question that matters most. Who makes life worth living? Who makes suffering bearable? Who would you reincarnate infinitely to stay connected to? Jake knew his answer. Finn, Lady, his kids, the people who chose him and whom he chose back. everything else was negotiable. Those bonds were permanent, worth maintaining through death and reincarnation and infinite incarnations. When you know who matters, decisions become simpler. You prioritize connection over achievement, presence over productivity, love over everything else. At the end of every adventure, after all the monsters and kingdoms and apocalyptic threats, Jake taught us that the real magic isn't living forever or being perfect or achieving greatness. It's deciding that right now, with the people you love, with bacon pancakes and music and simple pleasures and imperfect attempts at goodness, that's enough. That's sufficient. That's worthy. Not because it leads somewhere better or builds toward grand purpose, just because it exists, because you're alive enough to experience it, because connection and joy are their own justification. The meaning isn't external, it's in the living itself, in the choice to engage fully with whatever's available, in showing up for people who need you and for yourself when nobody's watching. Jake the Magic Dog, alien hybrid and former criminal, proved through 10 seasons and infinite incarnations that you don't need to be special to matter. You need to be present. You need to try. You need to admit when you fail. You need to love anyway. You need bacon pancakes and people who get your jokes and willingness to stretch yourself despite knowing you'll reach your limit eventually. That's the legacy. That's why he matters. That's why a cartoon dog who could become anything chose to become exactly what his world needed. Imperfect, loving, present until the end and beyond it, proving that the only real magic is choosing connection over isolation, kindness over cruelty, trying over giving up. We inherited a broken world. Jake showed us how to live in it anyway, not by fixing everything, but by being good to the people around us, finding joy where possible, admitting we're all making it up as we go along. That's not profound wisdom reserved for enlightened beings. That's practical guidance anyone can implement immediately. Be yourself. You'll suck at it initially. Keep trying. Eventually you'll get sort of good at being you, and that's enough. Make the bacon pancakes. Play the music. Love the people. Stretch when needed. Rest when required. Admit when you're wrong. Show up tomorrow and try again. That's the entire philosophy. That's Jake. That's the wisdom that saved lives and changed how generation approaches existence. Simple, accessible, immediately useful, just like Jake himself. No pretension, no complexity for complexity's sake. Just honest observation about how to exist as imperfect person in difficult world. The legacy isn't in some grand achievement or perfect example. It's in the accumulation of small choices made consistently over time, in showing millions of people that being flawed doesn't disqualify you from being good. And maybe, in a world that demands we be everything all the time, that's the most radical magic of all. Permission to be human, imperfect, trying, enough. Jake taught us that. We're still learning it. We'll probably be learning it forever. But at least we have bacon pancakes while we figure it out. And honestly, that's enough. Jake would say it's enough. And Jake the dog, magic, stretchy, alien hybrid, former criminal, father, brother, partner, friend, philosopher, hero, Jake was right about most things that actually matter. So make the bacon pancakes. Find your people. Stretch yourself for them. Rest when you need to. Keep trying despite constant failure. Be Jake. Be yourself. Same thing, probably. And that's the entire story of Jake the dog, from bite to death to infinite reincarnation, from criminal to hero, from scared puppy to wise dog who taught generation how to live. He was good enough. You're good enough. That's the beginning, middle, and end of the wisdom. Everything else is just adventure.